As a girl, the scariest thing about playing video games online is most definitely the weird interactions I have with random guys. Like a lot of my friends who play online, will deliberately obscure their gender with a nondescript username and profile picture and will never ever talk in party or game chats if there are guys present, which as you can imagine, there pretty much always is. But I've never been too concerned with presenting my real personality online. That, and I won't allow any creeps to force me into hiding who I am. But that doesn't mean I don't have some interactions or get some messages that genuinely creep me out. And here are a few of the weirdest or most disturbing I've come across so far. So I'm part of the PC gaming master race. Over the past few years, there's been an increasing amount of use of the Microsoft Party Chat thing for games purchased using the Microsoft Store. But generally speaking, the app we use to organize and communicate is Discord. Discord is nice in that you can't just get random messages from users at any time, but if you share a server with someone, they can pretty much DM you whenever they want. And since I'm in a lot of servers for the games I play, this leaves me pretty vulnerable to random DMs from creeps with less than innocent intentions. I suppose it doesn't help that one of my favorite games to play is Dead by Daylight. For those that don't know, it's a horror game in which one person plays as the killer, while the other players take on the roles of their victims, having to complete various tasks while evading the killer so they can escape whatever environment they're trapped in. This obviously attracts its fair share of online sadists who love nothing more than to terrify and traumatize the people they're hunting. They go so far as to insist on always being the killer, never ever playing as a survivor, and naturally this means they get really good at hunting people with their characters of choice. That's how I came across one particular player who specialized as a Dead by Daylight killer known as the Clown. Now I hate clowns with a passion, to the point where I couldn't bring myself to go see that It movie, even when my Stephen King fanatic boyfriend was so excited about seeing it. They just absolutely terrify me, probably because, and my mom never gets tired of telling me this story, I had a pretty traumatizing encounter with a party clown at a kid's birthday party when I was younger. The clown in Dead by Daylight is like all of my circus nightmares come to life. It kind of looks like a combination of a clown and a ringmaster, but has allusions to other circus stuff on him too. The face is all this worn-out grease paint smeared over a flabby mess of folds, but perhaps the most horrible are the fingers dangling from the thing's belt, the trophies he takes from his unfortunate victims. So, when this player happened to prefer the clown over others, I was kind of reluctant to play at first, but the group of survivors I usually play with adored him for the effort he put into role-playing the character, and therefore how much more intense and scary he made the whole experience. Like he kept putting this super creepy clown voice on over voice chat while he was chasing us, to the point where these big tough guys, self-confessed horror junkies, are just squealing in terror whenever he was chasing them. I think that's about the one thing that made it bearable for me. How funny it was when they were wailing like scared little girls. But let me tell you, it wasn't so fun when he was chasing me, and boy did he chase me a lot. At the end of the night, when a few of us were like, alright, that's enough terror for me, better log off before I give myself nightmares, I got a Discord DM from the guy saying, "You were really fun to chase." I tried to be polite enough, just replying with something like, "Cheers, dude, not too much fun to chase, I hope," with a little laughing emoji. Then he follows up with what seemed like was going to be a really long message, like the typing notification thing was going off for like a good few minutes, while I'm like, please don't be creepy, please don't be a creep. Then instead of some big long message, he only sends me a few words. I wish this was real. It was creepy enough sentiment on its own, but the thing that got me was that there was absolutely no way he spent so long typing out just 5 words. What else did he want to say to me that he ended up deleting and retyping over and over again for a minute straight that only ended up with 5 little words? I seriously dreaded to think what it might have been. The following night, we were all getting ready to play Dead by Daylight again, voice chatting on Discord when one of our party chat was like, "Oh, Clown Guy's online again. Should we invite him in?" My initial reaction was like, God no, but I'm not one to be a killjoy. The other guys really seemed to enjoy him, so I just found myself acquiescing to the idea and letting them invite him into our voice chat. Everyone greets him like, "Hey, Clown Guy," and instead of being polite or whatever, his first words are, "Is Ruby playing tonight?" He must have known well that I was playing. I was in the same voice chat as him, for God's sake, so the idea that he was asking so he could, hear my voice or something got the session off to a nice, creepy start. As weird as the dude was, he had been a great killer. He was passionate enough to bring energy to the character, but not skilled enough as to make it completely unfair on us. He also spent fairly equal time chasing each of us, not partaking in the act of tunneling as it's become known and focusing on one particular character. But that night, all he did was chase me. He would simply ignore any other survivor, searching for me and me alone to chase, torture, and kill. And once he'd achieved that, he'd just sort of waste time, letting the other survivors get the generators going so they could escape the stage and get a new round going. The first time around, his behavior went unnoticed by everyone but me. I think my fellow survivors were just too focused on their tasks and too elated with the victory to really notice what he was doing. But the second round it became obvious, and by the third, my usual crew was starting to confront him on it. "Hey, stop tunneling Ruby, dude, you're ruining the game," they'd say. But Clown Guy just ignored them and started breathing heavily down the mic. Now, this wasn't just him having it too close to his face, which is a problem a lot of people have, and is generally remedied by a quick heads up followed by them apologizing and moving the microphone. But Clown Guy was breathing heavy because he was enjoying chasing me a little too much. It was like you could hear all this gross satisfaction in his breath whenever he caught up with me, and it got so bad at one point that the other party members started to make some pretty crude jokes about his state of arousal. After one particular bad round, and me basically pleading with the other guys to kick him from the game and from the voice chat, they conceded and Clown Guy got kicked. Relieved doesn't cover it. This idiot had gotten me frustrated, angry, and eventually verging on upset. I was just so freaking relieved that the others had finally seen what a toxic, horrible individual he was. We only had one or two more games after that, with some random killer we'd been hooked up with via the game's matchmaking system. Then after that, I went to bed. But as I was reveling in affection for my regular gamer friends, I forgot to do one little thing that would separate me and Clown Guy forever. And the next morning, when I woke up, I found a little red iPhone notification marker for Discord that had a number on it in its high 50s. I should have guessed what it was, or rather, who it was, that had caused so many notifications overnight, but I guess it just didn't quite register in my half-asleep brain. So I opened the app and read the messages. I know I shouldn't have, but it was like seeing a slow-moving car crash or something, and I just couldn't quite peel my eyes away from it, no matter how bad it got. I'll try to type out some of what they said from memory whilst cleaning up the language used a little, and I apologize to anyone in advance who's triggered, offended, or upset by what they say. I bet you're happy now. Can't take on a good killer like me, so you just got your little simp friends to kick me. You shouldn't flatter yourself either. I've seen your profile picture and you're not even all that. You shouldn't be one to refuse any male attention either, because it's not like you have the pick of the bunch. Keep acting like that and you'll die cold and alone, with no one around to care for someone like you. You shouldn't go thinking you're safe either. I spend my life hunting down people like you, both in real life and in that dumb game. I asked enough questions about you when you were offline to figure out exactly where in the UK you live, and if I wanted to, I could be in your city and tracking you down tomorrow. I got the money, the time, and the patience. I will find you if I want to. And when I do, you'll pray for death before the end. Scholars will tell stories of the horrors I subject you to for generations. I'll put the names of Bundy, Dahmer, and Gein to shame. People will remember your name as a synonym for pain, suffering, and weakness, and my sons and daughters will touch themselves over the trophies I take from you and your broken, bleeding body. You should have blocked me when you had the chance, Ruby, but it appears you've been too dumb to do so, and now it's too late. I see you don't have a VPN either. It was far too easy for me to find your IP address, and now it's just a matter of time before I have your exact location, your full name, your family's name, and your friends' names. I will know your neighborhood like the back of my hand by the time I make it there, and you'll never escape me, no matter how hard you try. It went on and on like that, just a tirade of terrifying threats and misogynistic abuse. And the worst thing is, I couldn't help but picture him doing it, all in that horrendous clown outfit that his character wore. And what I just wrote wasn't even half of it. The language he used, the things he threatened to do with me. got way, way worse, and I don't want to repeat any of it. I don't want him having the satisfaction of knowing he got to me so badly, to the point where I just stayed offline for a few days after having blocked him. I got myself a VPN almost right away, and I'm hoping that's going to protect me, along with hoping all of his threats of hacking were just a bunch of bluster. But yeah, there it is. The most terrifying thing that ever happened to me while I was using Discord. In fact, it's probably the scariest thing that's happened to me online. Full stop. Probably the scariest thing that ever happened to me, actually. If anything, I'd like to serve as a warning to other gamers who happen to be female, and I hate the term gamer girls. As soon as a guy even shows the remotest signs of being pervy, possessive, or anything like that, hit that block button. God knows it'll save you a whole world of anxiety, like it did for me. A few years ago, I was part of a True Scary Stories server on Discord. It was a place where people would share their own personal stories of scary or spooky things that happened to them in their lives, and for a while it was honestly a lot of fun. Sure, a lot of the stories sounded made up and generally involved stuff like I saw a shadow figure at the end of my bed and other stuff that sounded like they were lifted straight out of a bad horror movie. But every so often someone would share a story that didn't have a hint of the supernatural in it, something that was actually believable, and occasionally these stories were genuinely terrifying. I read a lot of seriously spine-chilling stuff on that server, but a lot of it I've forgotten over the years, probably because although they were creepy, they just weren't disturbing enough to actually stick with me. But there was one story in particular that I've never forgotten, because it's genuinely made me shudder to read. I hope the user in question doesn't mind if I share their story, and if they happen to read this, I'd like to think that they could let me know in the comments and maybe correct anything I got wrong, because I'm telling this from memory. But anyway, here goes. The poster began their story by assuring us that their story wasn't just some fabrication, and although they were pretty young when it happened, just thinking or writing about it as an adult was a pretty stressful experience for them. They went on to explain that their early years were marred by tragedy, how their dad had died when they were real young from a drug overdose, so they were raised by a single mom living in a small apartment just down the street from their grandma's place. Mom did some dating, though, obviously trying to do the right thing and find them a stepdad to give them some kind of father figure in their life. The incident in question happened while she was out on a date. Usually speaking, their grandma would babysit for them anytime Mom needed to go do anything that meant she couldn't bring them along. But on the night of her date, the grandma was working, so although it wasn't ideal, 9 or 10-year-old storyteller was left unsupervised in their mom's ground floor apartment. Sounds kinda irresponsible at first, but the storyteller was quick to reassure the members of the server that this was back when Yu-Gi-Oh was popular. As long as they had their cards and a box set of cartoons to keep them occupied, being left alone for like an hour or two certainly wasn't an issue for them. It's not like they were going to wander out of the apartment or get up to any mischief while their precious Yu-Gi-Oh was keeping them busy. But at some point during the evening, they're sitting there playing with their cards and watching TV when they heard a tapping on the window. Remember, they lived in the ground floor apartment, so pretty much anyone could have just walked up and started tapping on the glass. No climbing or levitating or any of that stuff was involved, so there was nothing inherently worrying or creepy about someone knocking on the glass. The storyteller then gets up, walking towards the window before drawing back the curtains, only to reveal the face of a complete stranger. Not their grandfather, not their uncle, but a complete and utter stranger. Surprised and confused, they back off from the window, letting the curtains slide back into place before this horrendous crash sounds. Broken glass tumbles onto the carpet at the foot of the curtains, before another smash sends more glittering shards onto the floor in front of them. At that point, they said they just tossed their Yu-Gi-Oh cards onto the floor and bailed, rushing out of the back door of the apartment and over to a neighbor's house, pounding on the door in a state of abject terror as they looked over their shoulder every so often to ensure the mysterious predator wasn't hot in pursuit. But thankfully, the neighbor answers the door, lets our storyteller in, before taking the time to calm them down to get the full story out of them. Naturally, they called the cops immediately, who rushed over since they were given the description of a home invasion in progress. The neighbor then gets in touch with the storyteller's mom to let them know the awful news, who immediately rushes home to comfort their terrified son. Then after that, both the neighbor and storyteller's mom accompany them back to the apartment, where the cops are still searching the property and surrounding area for any sign of the attempted intruder. Apparently, one of the cops approaches the mom at this point and shows her something in a clear plastic evidence bag. Mom stares at it, turns pale, then kneels down and hugs our storyteller tight, fighting to hold back tears as the neighbor guy is just like, my God. They both ended up staying at the grandma's place for like a week after while the window was repaired. And if that seemed like a bizarre amount of time to fix a window and that something else might be behind them staying away from the apartment for a while, you'd be right in thinking that. Our storyteller had their suspicions for a little while, but they were too young to really understand the implications of what had happened. The kind of danger they'd been in wasn't clear until many years later, when their mom explained to them just what happened that evening. You see, it wasn't just the window that was being replaced. The entire apartment was being fitted with new, incredibly sturdy locks, CCTV cameras, just about everything short of a panic room, all being paid for by Grandma and Grandpa. The whole family was absolutely terrified, and it was all down to the piece of evidence that the cops showed to the mom that night, the little thing in the clear plastic evidence baggie that made her turn ashen and squeeze our storyteller in a big, trembling bear hug. What was in that plastic bag was a photograph of a young boy curled up in bed, sleeping soundly, and that boy was our storyteller. The mom told a much older storyteller that the photo couldn't have been taken long before the attempted break-in. Something about the sheets on the bed being fairly new or something. I can't quite remember. Or maybe it was a new haircut storyteller had gotten. But either way, it was some detail in there that made it clear that the attempted intruder had broken into the apartment somehow, maybe only a week prior, and taken a photograph of our storyteller while they slept. I can only imagine they had done so to several other children too, making a little catalog of potential victims, perusing them for hours on end before finally deciding on one they'd like the most. I think that's what made my blood run cold back when I read their story. The idea that the intruder had taken this perverse liking to them, one that was strong enough for them to be unable to resist their urges, or whatever kind of sick, twisted desires had them smashing that window in that evening. The family only felt safe again when they heard the news that the creeper, whose M.O. was eerily similar to their own experiences, was caught by police and jailed after being extradited to another state. But they kept the whole thing a secret from our storyteller until he was in his late teenage years. There was no more details after that. There wasn't any grand conclusion, just that it was something that had haunted him for years. I never read anything as horrifying as that on that Discord server. It made everything else seem tame in comparison, and I stopped reading shortly afterward. It's weird how we seek out scary stories sometimes, just to give ourselves a little thrill, but end up being genuinely traumatized. Not by the spoopy skeleton stories, but by things that we know could have easily happened for real. I used to play a lot of Insurgency Sandstorm with a fixed set of guys and a few girls, and we used to organize using a Discord server. People came and went as time went by, but there were a couple of us that actually stayed in touch quite frequently outside of just organizing gaming sessions and became pretty good friends. Insurgency, for those that haven't played it, is one of those hyper-realistic military shooters that tends to get really intense and occasionally downright terrifying when it's at its best. I'm not saying we had this proper Band of Brothers vibe going. I know it's only a video game, but like I said, a handful of us ended up being pretty good friends and bonding over the intense level of teamwork required to win rounds, not to mention the sweaty-palmed, adrenaline-fueled firefights. One of these was a lad named Colin. One day, Colin tells us that he wouldn't be playing Insurgency for a little while because he had taken a job teaching English as a foreign language out in Indonesia. He had wanted to do some traveling for a while, but just didn't have the money available to him, and getting qualified to teach English gave him an opportunity to see some more exotic areas of the world whilst getting paid for it. We were pretty gutted to hear the news. He was one heck of a sniper, and many a time we'd been pinned down by some enemy machine gunner, only for the gunfire to stop suddenly, followed by a little laugh from Colin and a have that in his Scottish accent. We absolutely loved him for moments like that, but we were also really happy for him. And since he promised to stay in the Discord server, we'd be able to keep in touch and hear some stories of his adventures out in the tropics. So a few months go by, and we're enjoying hearing the stories of his travels, along with being updated with photos of him exploring some pretty remote parts of Indonesia. It was the photos of him with the school kids he was teaching that really made me smile, though. He looked like he was having the time of his life, especially when we saw some videos of him teaching the kids some pretty obscure English phrases. Not only that, but occasionally we'd hear some of the kids actually repeat the phrases back kind of in a Scottish accent, and the idea of a bunch of Indonesian kids learning to speak English with an Edinburgh accent was absolutely hilarious to us. I mean, imagine it. Some American wishing an Indonesia fellow good morning or something, only to hear, "You alright, pal? Who's it going?" In response, it still makes me chuckle even now, to be honest. Then, in September of 2018, I woke up to the news that there had been an earthquake in the sea just off the coast of Indonesia, causing an earthquake that had resulted in a massive tsunami that had destroyed huge sections of the country. Immediately, I thought of Colin. I jumped onto Discord using the app on my phone and sent him a message asking him if everything was alright and hoping he'd not been caught up in the tsunami. Obviously, there was a huge 7 or 8 hour time difference between the UK and Southeast Asia, and occasionally Colin didn't reply for hours, so the fact that he didn't immediately reply wasn't a massive concern to me. But he didn't reply all that day, to the point where I started expressing concerns to some of the other lads in the server, sharing the news of the tsunami with them and mentioning that I was worried Colin had been caught up in it. We knew from the news stories about which areas of Indonesia had been affected, but we didn't know exactly where Colin was, only that he was in some remote areas and didn't always have immediate access to Wi-Fi, another reason for us to not immediately worry. But he didn't reply the next day either, or the day after that, and it got to the point where a week had gone by and we'd heard nothing back from him. No one had seen Colin, even online, since we got news of the tsunami. That's when we really started to worry, and as the days went by, we got more and more frightened that something had happened to him. It's around then that I started going back through some of the messages he'd been sending over the previous month or so. He'd been all over Indonesia, and had spent his first few weeks in the capital city of Jakarta, which had remained relatively unaffected by the earthquake and subsequent tsunami. But then I found out that he'd traveled to a place called Palu to teach English there, and as far as I could tell, that's where he'd been at the time of the disaster when it struck. I then cross-referenced the name of the place with any stories about the tsunami, and found out that it had been one of the worst affected by a destructive tidal wave that apparently reached 23 feet in height. 23 feet of rushing water that had destroyed pretty much everything in its path and caused the deaths of over 15,000 people, and in all likelihood, Colin had been one of them. We were devastated, but the worst part is, even to this day, we still have not had any closure about it. We knew Colin quite well, but he kept his online and personal life pretty separate. We never knew his last name or the names of any of his family, so it's not like we could get in touch with them to find out if he really had died or not, or to see about any funeral arrangements if he had indeed perished during the tsunami. But I think the fact that even now his Discord account lies inactive is evidence of the fact that he did actually lose his life out there. Maybe he's okay, and he just never bothered to get back on Discord. Maybe his close encounter with death made him realize that video games were just a waste of time or something. But I think that's just wishful thinking on my part. In my heart of hearts, I know he's probably dead. I just hope he's at peace now, and whatever family he had are okay. Rest in peace, Colin. We still miss you.
I downloaded Snapchat again a while ago. I usually take breaks from it because social media can affect my mental health, but I thought everyone else has it, so maybe it's a good way to stay in contact with my friends. I started snapping people back and noticed that since I last used it, they added a new feature where you could quick add people. I thought it was pretty cool, and maybe I'd make some new friends. Not long after, I started getting added by a few people. I didn't think much of it and gave it a blind eye, but I chatted here and there. Then, out of nowhere, about 2 days later, I was added to a group chat. At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed like a normal group chat of about 10 to 15 people talking about random stuff. Mostly it was guys, and they talked about typical things that guys talk about, like cars and sports, although there were a few women in the group. I barely participated and rarely said anything. A few more days passed, and still nothing weird had happened, which is funny because usually by now I'd be getting unsolicited messages. Then someone added me. His name was Josh, and he was from the group chat. He started messaging me personally, but never mentioned anything about the group or anybody in it. It seemed like he was trying to get to know me. We talked a lot, sometimes all night, and even FaceTimed a few times. He'd ask me things like what I liked to do and what my favorite food was. It was nice, and I was happy to make a normal friend. But then he started asking weird, personal questions. It felt like he was fishing for something, but I couldn't figure out what. One night, he asked me something strange. I can't even remember exactly what, but it was enough to make me uneasy and wonder if something was off about him. Then it happened. Everyone got kicked out of the group chat except for me and 6 other guys. It was unsettling, but I tried not to think about it too much and I brushed it off. This time, the group was a lot more talkative, not just to each other, but specifically to me. They acted like we'd been best friends for years. I played along but remained skeptical about Josh. Soon enough, we all got close, and they started suggesting hanging out as a group. They wanted to play pickleball around 8 p.m. I was confused. Why so late? But they explained it was because everybody worked late, so I agreed. I mentioned it to some of my friends, and they said that it sounded sketchy, but nothing bad had ever happened to me before, so I didn't think much of it. That night, I grabbed my pickleball gear and headed to the meeting spot. When I arrived, the parking lot was empty. I assumed they weren't there yet, so I waited. Eventually, I saw cars pulling in, 6 of them. At first, I was relieved, thinking I was overreacting. But then I noticed something strange. The cars all parked on the opposite side of the lot, far from mine. Josh and the others got out, along with a woman who I didn't recognize. She had her pickleball gear with her and walked over to them. They all gathered around her as if talking, but then suddenly they grabbed her. In the blink of an eye, they shoved her into one of the cars. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't normal. I fumbled for my phone, panicking, and checked the group chat. Josh had just sent me a message. "Where are you? We've been waiting for you. It's about to open." They wanted me to show up. I froze and realized that could have been me. My mind raced as Josh sent another message. "Why aren't you responding? Is something wrong?" I looked up, and the group was still in their cars. The woman's car was off, and someone else then got into it and drove it away, probably to hide the evidence. That's when I realized what had just happened. That girl had been kidnapped. It hit me hard. With Snapchat's new update, random group invites had become a tool for traffickers. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that felt safe. I stayed in my car and I drove away. As I did so, I called the police and reported everything, giving descriptions of the car and the guys the best I could. I don't know if they saw me leave, but I immediately blocked Josh and left the group chat. To this day, I still get random friend requests on Snapchat, but I'll never add someone I don't know again. So, me and my friends used to have this group chat that was mostly for sending stupid memes. Occasionally, we'd talk about hanging out, but it was always the same thing. People would say, "Yeah, for sure," and then never actually hang out. The group was me, Emily, David, and Ryan. Ryan was your typical guy, always getting into weird situations and trouble. He was constantly meeting sketchy people on eBay or Craigslist, trying to make a quick buck off random stuff he had lying around. One day, Ryan was selling his four-wheeler and asked us to come with him because he didn't trust the buyer. We told him, if you don't trust him, why sell it to him in the first place? But Ryan didn't get what we were trying to say. He barely even acknowledged that it was a red flag. We were all confused as to why he wasn't seeing what seemed obvious to us. We told him to just leave it and wait until he could find a more trustworthy buyer, but he didn't listen. He told us the deal was on the south side of the city, which was the sketchiest area imaginable. That side of town was notorious for crime and kidnappings. That was the biggest red flag of all. None of us wanted to go, but Ryan wouldn't listen. Throughout the day, he was snapping us updates about getting his stuff ready and making progress on the sale. I messaged one of the other friends in the group chat privately and told them, I don't think we should let him go over there. They replied, why not? He's a grown man. If he gets into trouble, that's on him. We warned him. I thought that was a pretty stupid reason to abandon a friend who might get himself into serious trouble. No one else was listening to me though, and they insisted I was overreacting. They said if Ryan needed to learn a lesson, then so be it. Hours went by, and Ryan was at the person's house. We kept checking up on him because, like I said, the whole thing felt wrong. He kept snapping us back, reassuring us that everything was fine and that we were overreacting. But still, we couldn't relax until we knew he was safe. Then he sent a snap of himself in a basement. We all thought, why are you in their basement? Someone even commented, what are you doing down there? But he didn't respond, which was really odd. I figured maybe he was busy talking to the buyer and just wanted to update us. But then he snapped another picture from a different room in the basement. It was getting weirder and weirder each snap. Still, we ignored it because we figured if he was snapping us, he must be okay. The next snap was in a dark room showing someone's feet, but they weren't Ryan's feet. That's when we realized someone else had taken Ryan's phone and had been snapping us the whole time, pretending everything was fine. We started panicking. We tried to check his location, but the person who had his phone turned it off. We knew something was seriously wrong and that we needed to act fast, but we didn't know what to do. We tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. We thought about contacting his family, but none of us knew them. We were stuck. Someone suggested driving to the area to try to find his car, but we knew that could take hours and maybe even days, and it wasn't a guaranteed plan because we didn't even know the location. The next snap came in and I nearly lost it. It was a photo of fresh blood on the floor, wet, bright red, and horrifying. We all froze. That's when we realized we weren't just overreacting. Something terrible had happened. We immediately FaceTimed each other and tried calling the police from someone else's phone. But without any concrete evidence or location, we couldn't do much. We were completely out of luck. We all went to bed that night, frantic and unable to sleep. Days and weeks passed, and we didn't hear a thing from Ryan. Then, about 6 months later, we saw his face on the news. He'd been reported missing. I thought to myself, if we had just gone with him or stopped him, maybe we could have done something. After months of searching, the police gave up. Then, out of nowhere, someone found Ryan walking down the highway in nothing but his underwear and shoes. He looked starved, barely alive. When we finally got the full story in the group chat, we couldn't believe what had happened. To be honest, I can't even talk about it. It's too gruesome and traumatizing. I'm just glad that Ryan is alive. The story I'm about to tell you isn't like the other stories you might hear about someone getting stalked or followed. Unfortunately, I was the stalker, and I was the one following somebody. I'm not proud of who I was in the past, but I can't change it, so I just accept it and tell my story. Maybe there are others out there who will stop being like who I was. So this happened about 6 years ago, so it's not who I am anymore, but I used to stalk people whenever I got the chance. I had a particular interest in certain individuals, but I could never really find the right person to engage in with any type of stalking way. That was until one day I decided to download Snapchat. I heard it was a good way to make friends, so I added all the close people I knew. They never knew what I was up to when I was home alone. Nobody did, and that's what I liked. I like to stalk people. There's a mentality that goes into being someone who likes to stalk people. As I said, I downloaded Snapchat and started adding my friends. One of them was named Emily. I had no interest in Emily, and I was fine with that. I really liked our friendship. But I think that I typed a few numbers wrong, and I ended up adding a random Emily instead. I didn't notice until that night when I got a snap from her, and it looked nothing like Emily's house or anything familiar. I thought about deleting her, but after a few conversations, she sent a snap of her face, and it was perfect. Her hair, the way she looked, everything I ever fantasized about. This was at the peak of my stalking phase. I immediately started asking her questions like I was genuinely interested in being her friend. But honestly, I just wanted information so I could scour the internet. She told me her last name and the city she lived in, and that was all I needed to find everything. Her parents, the inside of her house through Zillow. I also knew her dog, her schedule, everything about her. I probably knew more about her than her parents did. At this point, I knew what college she went to, and most importantly, where she lived. That fueled me as the stalker I was. I played it cool. She had no idea I was so obsessed with her. We talked, and to my surprise, she only lived about 30 minutes away. What are the odds, I thought. But honestly, in my mindset back then, I felt like it was meant to be. We kept talking, and I asked to meet up with her for some snacks. Something harmless so she wouldn't figure out my true intentions. She agreed. When the day came, I got all dressed up in my nicest clothes, and looked as handsome as I could. We went out for ice cream. It was casual, but I didn't want to let the chance of something deeper slip away. So I pursued her with interest. She seemed to really like me. Honestly, after the first time we went out, we texted each other all night, literally until 2 a.m. It was that cheesy love type stuff. Things were going so well that the lines started to blur between my obsession and actual love, but I had just met her, so I knew something wasn't right. From her perspective, I was just a really nice guy interested in her, but from mine, I had a different agenda. Even when I told myself I didn't, I'd get in my car, drive 30 minutes out, stop at a gas station to get snacks, and park down her road. I parked where I could barely see her house, but just enough to see her room, which was on the back side of her house. I never got caught. I saw her talking to her friends and hanging out with them. I never saw anything inappropriate like her getting dressed. I thought that was too far, and I respected that boundary. But my obsession grew stronger and stronger. Stalking turned into an unbearable urge to act. I started going insane. I checked her social media constantly, analyzed her posts, and tried to decipher her tweets. That's when jealousy hit me, hard. One night, she tweeted a cryptic message about somebody making her feel a certain way. I knew it wasn't me because we had only met once. The anger consumed me. I did what no normal person would do. I figured out a way to get her passwords. I asked her a ton of questions, and I slipped in a password-related question as a joke. Eventually, I got her password. I made sure to only sign in when I was near her house, so it wouldn't seem suspicious. You'd be surprised how easy it is to get someone's Wi-Fi password. Once I was in, I read through all her DMs and messages, just to make sure there wasn't anyone else, and boy was I wrong. There was this guy named Brad, and he was everything I wasn't. I couldn't let that happen. I hopped on her messages and threatened him, pretending to be her. I said things like, "If you ever talk to me again, I'll call the police. Don't ever speak to me again. I hate you." I deleted the messages and blocked him. Honestly, I don't think she ever noticed, because she ended up messaging one of her best friends saying, "I think Brad blocked me." I was in the clear. At this point, I felt like I should have backed away from stalking. It was no longer harmless or fun. It was dangerous, for me and for her. But I didn't stop. We hung out again, staying up super late and getting breakfast together. Everything seemed fine. She smiled at me, and I knew I was in too deep. We went home and texted again, this time calling until 3 a.m. and falling asleep on FaceTime. It felt amazing, innocent even, but I couldn't let innocence be a part of me because I wasn't innocent. One night, I reached my breaking point. I wanted to break into her house just to see her. I couldn't stay away another second. I knew everything, when her parents weren't home, when they worked, and their schedules. At 4 a.m. on Tuesday, I made my move. I got in my car, drove to her house, put on a ski mask, and approached her home. I don't know what it was, guilt, a second thought, or a small part of me that still had decency, but I couldn't do it. I touched the window, found it open, and could have slid right in. But instead, I closed it, made it look like it was never open, and then went back to my car. I took off my mask and gloves, blocked her number, and drove home. I couldn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling. Maybe it's because I had lost myself. Maybe it's because I became the monster I swore I'd never be. To this day, she has no idea how close I was, and I'm happy she doesn't. I hope she's living a happy life with people who truly love her. As for me, I've changed, and I don't do anything like that anymore. I'm not proud of who I was, but it's part of my past. I feel like some people might relate to this, because we've all heard of someone taking a Snapchat and noticing something they shouldn't have seen. One night, I was sitting at home. It was late, and I was completely alone. I lived in a very rural area, far from any neighbors or buildings, in a small town in Minnesota. I won't name the town, but there was no one around for miles. My house was pretty big because my parents were farmers, but they did really well for themselves. I'd say they were millionaires, so we had one of those rich farmhouses. It was white with columns everywhere, and the living room was the size of 2 kitchens. I'm just trying to paint the picture for you. That night, I was sitting on the couch, watching a movie, Snapchatting my girlfriend and some friends. I was eating, relaxing, and the whole night had been completely quiet. No strange sounds, no mysterious figures outside the window. I wasn't worried at all. I'd never had any incidents, not even with coyotes. I felt safe. Like I said, I'm being overly detailed to set the scene. My Snapchat was open, and I figured it was a good time to send a picture to my girlfriend because I'd just gotten out of the shower and I felt like I looked good. My couch faced away from the floor-to-ceiling windows, which I'd left open. Why? I don't know. There'd never been an incident, so I didn't think much of it. I snapped a picture and sent it to my girlfriend. A few minutes later, I noticed her name pop up in the chat. She said, "Kyle, I think someone's behind you. Do you have someone over?" She sounded frantic. I responded, "No, what are you talking about?" and I turned around. I saw nothing. Just to make sure, I took another picture. this time framing the window more clearly, and sent it. She saved the snap and replied, "Kyle, do you not see it?" So I looked closer, and my heart sank. There was a man, a full-grown man, about 6'5", standing outside my window, staring at me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. Should I text her back? Should I run? Should I pretend nothing happened? I didn't want to panic her, so I played it cool and said, "Let me double check." But inside, I was scared out of my mind. I was alone with no service in most parts of the house. I thought, what should I do? What would John Wick do? Before I could decide, I heard glass shatter from upstairs. The smash echoed through the house, coming from the top floor. We had 4 floors: basement, main floor, upstairs, and attic. I panicked and remembered reading somewhere that if someone breaks into your house, you should turn off all the lights because you know the house better than they do. I ran to the light switch, and luckily our house had a smart system, so with one button I turned off all the lights and locked all the doors. But it didn't matter. He'd already smashed a window to get in. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a golf club. I wasn't about to let some intruder take over my house. I was in fight mode. I moved to the 2nd floor, thinking he wouldn't realize I was no longer on the main floor. I could hear his footsteps above me, slow and deliberate, like a movie. I didn't know if he had a weapon, but I gripped the golf club tighter. As I listened, I heard him coming down the stairs. I hid behind a wall, holding the club like a kid playing hide and seek. The tension was unbearable. When he stepped off the last stair, I swung as hard as I could, hitting him in the knee. He tumbled down the stairs and scrambled to his feet, running. I chased him, yelling, "Get back here," as if that would stop him. In my panic, I tripped and fell down the stairs, dropping the club. By the time I got up, he was gone, hiding somewhere else in the house. Now I was unarmed, searching for an intruder. I felt completely vulnerable. I ran upstairs to my parents' room, looking for a weapon. I found a gun taped under my dad's bed. I couldn't believe it. What kind of a person tapes a gun there? But I was desperate. I grabbed the gun and shouted, "Come out or I'll shoot." He yelled back, "Do it, I dare you." I couldn't pinpoint his location, but it sounded like he was in the far left corner of the basement. Without thinking, I ran down there and started firing. 6 shots echoed through the house, deafening me. My ears were ringing so badly I dropped the gun. The man bolted past me, jumping over my arms as I tried to grab him. Disoriented, I could barely hear or react. He ran to the front door, but it was locked, and he couldn't figure out the system. Panicking, he ran to the 4th floor and smashed another window before jumping out and disappearing into the woods. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. I immediately called my parents and told them everything. My girlfriend had been blowing up my phone asking if I was okay. My parents got home a few days later. I showed them the damage and told them everything. I yelled at my dad for leaving a gun where anyone could find it, but he said it might have saved my life. Long story short, the cops came and found no evidence of the man. With no neighbors nearby, there were no witnesses. I still don't know what his intentions were, but I'm grateful my girlfriend noticed something in that Snapchat. Without her, I don't know what would have happened. This happened about 5 years ago. I was 16 at the time, and like most high school kids, I was on Snapchat almost 24/7. It was the way that I communicated with all my friends, and I had like 20 different streaks with people. I still use Snapchat today, in fact, but not quite to the same level. Anyways, one night, I was in my bedroom just watching TV and snapping friends. I lived with my parents at this time, as well as my older sister. I remember that I was on the app and I saw someone new added me. It was a girl named Sophie, so without even looking at her profile or anything, I added her back. I didn't recognize her name, but I thought that maybe she went to my school or we had mutual friends. I didn't know why else somebody would add me. Also, without giving it much thought, I sent her a selfie without any words. I wanted to see who she was. She responded back within a minute, except it was not a picture of her face. She was outside and it was nighttime, so I couldn't see much. It looked like she was in somebody's backyard and there was a house. After like 5 seconds of looking at it though, I realized it. This was my house. I was so confused. The picture did not have her in it at all. It was just a picture of my house. I got up and went over to my bedroom window, which did look out to the backyard. However, we did not have good lighting back there. The backyard light was off, and there were numerous trees in the yard. I couldn't see anything. I kept looking though. Then I snapped the girl back, but instead of a photo, I sent a message. I asked who she was and why she was in my yard. Then, as I was still looking into the backyard, I saw a flash of light quickly come out from behind a tree. Then it went away. I barely saw a person sort of behind it, but I didn't get a good look at them at all. Then I got the snap of the picture that I had just seen being taken. It was a flash photo this time of the back of my house again with no words. I was so confused. I continued to look out the window. Then I saw what appeared to be a man run out from behind the tree and then hop the fence into the neighbor's yard. I couldn't see very well at all. It was literally just enough to distinguish that it was probably a guy, partly from the looks and partly from movement. I couldn't tell how old this person was or anything. It happened so fast. I was really freaked out, but told myself that maybe it was a prank by one of my friends. After that, I went around the house and covered every window and double-checked all the locks. Then I went back to my room. When I got there, I saw that I had a voice recording sent to me on Snapchat by the same user. I say user because at this point, I was sure that it wasn't the girl it appeared to be on Snapchat. I played the recording. It was the sound of a man laughing, and he seemed older than high school age. I was so creeped out. I started snapping all my friends, telling them about it. None of them seemed to have any idea who it was, as if it might have been a prank or something. After that, I blocked the user. For a few weeks, I felt paranoid, wondering if somebody else would add me, or if someone would show up in my backyard, but nobody did. I still wonder who did that, and why. This is something that happened about 4 years ago. It all started when I got added by this random guy on Snapchat. I think his name was John something. I don't remember exactly. But I didn't immediately recognize his name or anything. Still, I added him back and didn't think too much of it. During this time, I was in college working on my master's degree. With the 5+ years that I had spent in college and the various jobs that I worked, I figured he maybe knew me from somewhere. I also had quite a few friends on the Snapchat app. So anyways, a few days went by after this. One day I was at home in my apartment, and for some reason I looked onto the Snap map. This map shows you and all of your friends' locations if they have it turned on. Well, I noticed that there was a guy on the Snap map seemingly in my apartment complex. It was the guy who had recently added me. I figured that maybe he lived there as well. He did not have his last name on his Snapchat, so I didn't know who he was or how to find out. After that, the next day, I happened to be on the other side of town with a couple of friends. We were at a park working out, and it was kind of a popular area. There were quite a few other people there, and shortly before leaving, I looked on my phone and I looked at the Snap map again. I remember that my friends and I were seeing where another one of our friends was. Well, I noticed that the same guy was at the park. He did not appear to be right next to me, but was pretty close. I looked around, and I didn't know what he even looked like, but I also didn't notice anything strange. Within my sight, there were probably at least 20 different people. Maybe this was just a coincidence, but it seemed kind of odd to me. Things got even stranger though. I started to get curious, and when I got home, I looked on my Snap map again. Once more, the guy was seemingly right outside of my apartment a short time after I got home. The next day, I went to the grocery store, which was just a couple of miles away from my place. When I was there, I randomly had the thought to look on the map. I thought, there's no way this guy's gonna be here as well. But when I looked, he was there, and according to the map, was in the parking lot. Now, the locations on Snapchat only update when you're on the app, and they're also not always 100% accurate with location, but they're usually pretty close. I looked around the store for the rest of the time that I was there. I honestly couldn't tell where the guy was though. I didn't even know what he looked like. But this was very suspicious, and I started to wonder if he even lived in my apartment complex, or was he possibly stalking me? When I got home that night, I looked on the map almost immediately. The guy appeared on the map seemingly right outside of my place again. Now I decided to ask him some questions. I sent him a chat on Snapchat asking who he was and how he knows me. After sending the chat, I went into my settings and then turned my location off. Then I saw that the guy had opened my message, but had seemingly left me on red. I was very confused, so I just blocked the guy. Several minutes went by. I lived on the first floor of my apartment building. I was in my living room, and then there was suddenly a knock at my window. It was coming from my bedroom. I went inside, and as soon as I did, saw this man standing there looking into my window. I had never seen him before in my life. This was the guy who added me on Snapchat? I moved out of the room, but he continued to knock on my window, and the knocking was seeming to get louder. I decided to call the police. This guy was appearing to stalk me or something, So I told the police what was going on, and they said that they would be there shortly. Meanwhile, the man at the window had mostly stopped knocking by then. I went into my bedroom to look, and I no longer saw him there. After looking out of the window, it seemed as though he had left. But just moments after that, I heard the sound of somebody trying to open the front door to my apartment. It was locked, and that was followed by a knock at the front door. I stayed in my bedroom. After that one knock, though, I didn't hear anything else. Things were quiet until the police got there maybe 5 to 10 minutes later. After that, I spoke to them and gave them every bit of information that I could. Unfortunately, it seemed like the man had left, and since then, I've never heard from him again.
My name is Honey. I'm almost 30 and I use Instagram to share pictures of my art. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Honey is a weird name, so please don't tell me what I already know. No, it's not a nickname. My parents are from California and they're like uber hippies, so go figure. As you can probably guess, I grew up in this overly loving, peacenik environment, which I'm sure sounds cool at first, but let's just say it left me wholly unprepared to deal with some of the darker things in life. Needless to say, I really struggled with my mental health in my mid to late 20s. I don't want to totally blame my parents for that. I think they did the best that they could, but they seriously didn't help with their just fill your heart with love nonsense, when what I needed was actual therapy and antidepressants. I got access to professional help in the end, but what really helped me keep it together in the meantime was my art. Before I started to suffer with depression and stuff, I used to paint and draw some pretty basic stuff. Landscapes, portraits, floral displays, stuff like that. But when I started to really suffer, I let out all my stress, anxiety, and sadness on the paper, and as weird as it sounds, that's when my art really started to flourish. It was probably the only silver lining to ever come out of my poor mental health. The more I posted my newer, darker art on Instagram, the more attention it got. My follower count shot up, I got offers for commissions, I actually managed to hook up with a t-shirt merch company and make a few sales that way too. Like I drew this pizza demon thing one time and that made me a few $100 from people wanting that thing on a t-shirt too. So when I say dark, I really do mean I started drawing some really messed up stuff. The pizza demon thing was probably the lightest-hearted thing I put out there in that time, and even then, people said it was super messed up. So as you might imagine, my new followers included some pretty messed up people. I don't say that to be like I'm complaining or mean or anything. I say that because one of them in particular made my life pretty difficult. So I get a direct message off of this guy who says he really loved my work and wanted a piece commissioned. Of course I say yes. So he follows up by asking what my rates are. I had no idea what I was doing in terms of dollar amounts at that time, so when I quoted him like $80 for a picture, he started explaining that I needed to value my art more, how my work was just as valuable as any other, and how I should be charging a whole bunch more for my art. I had no idea what to up my amount to, so I kind of threw out a few ballpark figures before the guy makes my jaw hit the floor when he offers me a straight grand for an A3 size picture of whatever I wanted to draw or paint. I couldn't believe it. $1,000 for a picture? Which was more money than I'd ever made in my whole life. I got to work straight away, and within a week I'd poured my heart and soul out onto paper and sent it off, and got my money via PayPal. Having that kind of affirmation actually lifted my mood to the highest it had been in months. I felt valued, like I could contribute something to the world. I was still dealing with my demons, but when I learned that I could actually profit from them, that I could make use of something that plagued me, it was a great feeling. I stayed in touch with the guy. I'd never been so grateful to anyone in my life until that point, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think I'd be able to get more money out of him if he wanted something else commissioning. We used to talk back and forth a fair bit, and he shared that he too was an artist. I asked him what kind of artist he was, and he told me that he worked in some very unusual mediums. Naturally, this only got me all the more curious, as I got super dark with my art too, but he seemed pretty timid to talk about it. I get that people can be shy about showing off their artwork, I was pretty shy too at one point, but this guy needed some serious coaxing in order to show me anything. When he finally agreed to show me anything, he told me that he'd do it via one of those self-destructing messages that Insta now does. I didn't question anything. Like, I knew he'd send one of those self-destructing pictures, maybe so he could protect his intellectual property or something. I was a little confused as to why he didn't seem to trust me, but hey, I pretty much adored this guy, so like I said, I didn't ask too many questions. I waited patiently for him to send me a picture of some of his work. It took a minute or two, but he sends me this 3-second self-destructing picture that I was honestly super excited to see by that point. But when I actually saw what it was, even if it was for a real brief time, I really, really wish I hadn't. It looked like a goat's head in a jar of some kind, and the fluid it was floating in looked sort of greenish-black, and I'm pretty sure it was formaldehyde. But it wasn't just that. The guy had opted to make a few little additions to the goat head, additions that I couldn't all catch because of how quick the picture flashed before my eyes, but the ones that I saw were horrible. It looked like he carved the lips away so that all the creature's teeth were showing, and on each one was carved or written a little symbol. I'm also pretty sure he either chemically changed the creature's eyes or replaced them entirely with a kind of metal or semi-precious stone. They had this weird glint to them. Like I said, there wasn't enough time for me to drink the whole thing in, but there was plenty more about the creature's head that had been messed with. It wasn't the details which really got to me. It was the idea that the corpse of an animal had been so horribly disrespected just so he could try to make some kind of art out of it. I had questions, a lot of questions, but the first thing I had to ask him was if it was really real or just some kind of mock-up of a skull. He told me it was real. Very real, and that he'd gotten hold of a goat's head from a butcher, preserved it, and then basically surgically edited the thing over time, mostly using dental tools, apparently for the sake of precision. I personally thought the whole thing was a disgrace. I'm vegan, and I try to stay as ethical as possible, but at the same time, I didn't want to go imposing my own worldview on the guy, especially since I liked him so much. I also didn't want to offend him, so I told him his work was interesting and jaw-dropping, then asked if he worked with ink and paper or any variation on that. He told me no, and that he only worked with skulls, how they were the capsule that held all the hopes and dreams and fears and needs of the once living creature they belonged to, and that working with them was kind of sacred. I didn't really know what to say to that. He was right in a way. He sounded absolutely crazy for saying it out loud, but I couldn't entirely refute his point. It was like talking to some kind of insane genius almost. Not long after, he asked me if he thought he was cruel to work in such a medium. I told him people might find his work provocative, maybe even objectionable, but that it was fascinating nevertheless. And then he asked if I wanted to see more. Unlike the first time, there was no doubt in me that I most definitely did not want to see any more of this guy's work. But like I said before, I also really didn't want to offend him. So what could I do? It took me much longer to reply to his message that time, but in the end I told him sure. And he replied saying that he'd use another self-destructing message. Again, I waited a minute or two for the message to come through, and when it did, I opened up the message thread and tapped the little reveal message thing with some reluctance. The first time around, for that goat heads thing, I at least had some degree of curiosity, but at that time, I was just plain horrified by what I saw. It was a monkey's head, or at least it looked like it was some kind of primate, and if I thought the goat's head had received some disturbing additions, this latest one turned out to be 1,000 times worse. It was so bad I only caught the briefest glimpse of it and just had to look away and lock my phone screen to get it away from me. I was a little more confrontational with him after that, telling him that one was considerably more disturbing than the first, and I thought it was maybe a little too sensitive to see any more of his work. He asked why, and I broke it to him that I've been vegan for a few years, that I was a real animal lover, and although I could stomach the goat thing's head, I really couldn't handle the monkey head as it looked far too human to me. That's when he replies to me all like, it's interesting you should say that, and goes on to explain that it's his dream to work with a human skull. how he's put up a few ads on 4chan and stuff asking if anyone would be willing to donate their head should they die, but hadn't gotten any replies. And then he told me that he was getting really impatient, and that he was worried he wouldn't get a chance to realize his dream. The whole exchange had reached peak creepiness by that point, as you can imagine, and it was fast getting to the point when I was reaching for that block option, as I just didn't feel safe talking to him anymore. So by the time he actually messaged me another self-destructing message asking if I'd be willing to help him get hold of a human head, I just noped out of there and stopped replying to him. Like, I'm not sure he was actually asking me to, kill anyone with him or for him, but just the idea of going about procuring an actual human head? God, no. But I couldn't bring myself to block him. He was a potential source of sales after all, and I could make a lot of money from the guy if I kept him interested in my work. I try not to think about it, but I get these really bad feelings from time to time. What if he catches on to the fact that I just ignore him? And what if he decides that my head is the one he'd like to use to complete his magnum opus? I try very careful with what I post now, making sure it's only ever pictures of my art, and that the handful of landscape photos I'd posted on my profile had been deleted, just so whoever it is can't get an idea of where I live. Because if they do work out where I'm at, there's just no way I'd be able to go around feeling safe. Not with someone whose ambition is to work with severed human heads, knowing where I lay mine at night. Alexis Sharkey was born in Houston, Texas in the year 1994 to her father, Mike Robinault, and her mother, Stacy. After graduating high school, Alexis initially studied biology education at a university in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but after gaining her diploma, she seemed to be in no rush to get a teaching job and found work at a premium hair and skincare company named Monat. She was still working for Monat when she began to gain a great number of followers on the photography-based social media app Instagram. A combination of her natural beauty and her champagne lifestyle had users hooked. She and her husband, a wealthy West Texas consultant who was 26 years her senior, were accustomed to vacationing a lot, and Alexis wasted no opportunity to document her travels, sharing pictures with her followers on a daily basis. Not to mention sharing images of the couple's extravagant life around Houston, the place that they'd made their home. Her posts would be seen, liked, and shared by tens of thousands of people, and by December of 2020, Alexis had over 69,000 followers. Now, as you may know, Instagram users with large amounts of followers are often contacted by private companies and offered large amounts of money in exchange for advertising their products, and Alexis was no different. Within a relatively short period of time, whilst still working full-time selling products for Monat, which has since been accused of being nothing more than a multi-level marketing company, Alexis was getting sponsorship deals which made her income swell to even higher levels than her consultant husband. But all was not well in the Sharkey home. A close friend of Alexis confessed that she had recently confided in her that she was filing for a divorce. Some had always doubted their relationship given that Tom was considerably older than her, and aside from an intense attraction, the couple seemed to have very little in common. Yet for some reason, Alexis didn't move out of the apartment they shared, even though she and Tom were apparently separated. However, she did see an opportunity to get a breakaway from Tom, as Thanksgiving weekend gave her the chance to stay over at a friend's place for the celebrations. She told her soon-to-be ex-husband that she would be back by the weekend, but on the Saturday following Thanksgiving, Alexis's mother, Stacy, received a call from Tom saying that Alexis was missing, and that he hadn't heard from her since Friday. A few days later, on November 28th, Alexis's mother posted to the social media site Facebook, stating that her daughter hadn't been heard from in over 24 hours, adding that police were involved and that Alexis had last been seen in the Houston area. This was especially concerning for Stacy, as she hadn't seen her daughter since the previous Christmas due to travel restrictions caused by the pandemic. Alexis had planned to return home to her parents back in Pennsylvania for Thanksgiving, but as the number of cases continued to rise all over the United States, the family decided it was much safer for Alexis to stay in Texas. But that very same morning that Stacy posted her plea on Facebook, a sanitation worker employed by the city of Houston saw something unusual lying on the side of the road. At first, he simply believed it was some kind of mannequin, due to the lack of clothes and the stiff positioning of the thing's limbs. But the worker's supervisor, a man named John Richardson, later said that the employee had sounded terrified when he called him, saying he'd noticed the apparent mannequin looked a little too real upon closer inspection, and that he suspected the situation to be far worse. John drove down to where the supposed mannequin was lying at the side of the road, then rushed to call 911 when he saw that it was no mannequin at all. That it was in fact a lifeless human body. The moment of realization traumatized him, and he later told a local radio station that the sight of the body had been playing in his head every day since he discovered it. 2 days later, on November 30th, Houston Police Department held a press conference in which they announced that they had identified the body as belonging to none other than Alexis Sharkey. Her soon-to-be ex-husband got a call from a local coroner's office, asking him to drive over to identify the body of a potential loved one. He knew immediately that it was going to be Alexis, but somehow found the strength to head on over, where he found her lying on a mortician's table, dead but with no obvious signs of injury. Yet to his horror, after the news of Alexis's death began to circulate in the news, he began to hear rumors that it was his maltreatment of her that had been the cause of her death. Anonymous accounts from people claiming to be friends of Alexis had told a number of online news publications that the separation from her husband had caused a huge amount of tension in their home, a tension that had soured into hatred. These anonymous friends claimed that Alexis herself had told them that some intense arguments had descended into violence more than once, and that her husband had been putting his hands on her. Suddenly, Tom Sharkey found himself bathed in the media spotlight, and for entirely negative reasons. In what became a lightning-quick trial by media, one which was fueled by social media speculation, tens of thousands of furious people assumed that it was Tom that was the murderer, and he began to receive a slew of death threats. It certainly didn't help that initially Tom had refused to comment on his wife's death, but as the threats against him became more and more tangible, he reached out to give a statement to a local ABC affiliate. She understood me. I understood her. We didn't fight when she left. I just told her she shouldn't drive under the influence, he said, overtly implying that Alexis had been drunk the night that she left her friend's Thanksgiving celebrations. He also seemed to insist that there was no trouble in their marriage, and that they weren't filing for divorce at all. This was something that was backed up by Alexis's mother, who said her daughter would have told her if she was suffering marital problems. When the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences conducted an autopsy on Alexis's body, they told reporters that they couldn't rule out the possibility of foul play. This only cemented her mother's suspicions that she met a violent end. I believe solely that she was murdered because of the manner in which her body was left, Stacy said. It just drives deep into the soul that something very malicious happened here, and I want to get to the bottom of it. Friends said she confided in them on a recent trip to Mexico that she feared for her life, although she apparently did not say why she held such suspicions. But if this was the case, just who exactly killed Alexis? Police seem to have pretty much ruled out the idea that she was murdered by her husband, since he was quick to volunteer his cooperation with them in the aftermath of her death, and has since stated that they believe it to be only a matter of time before arrests are made. So perhaps Alexis's murder was related to her career selling beauty products of Monat. Not only has Monat been accused of utilizing the techniques of outlawed, multi-level marketing companies, but the quality of its products has also come into question. In the year before Alexis's death, Monat was allegedly investigated by Florida's Attorney General after hundreds of claims that its products caused a host of hair and skin issues. The company was permanently barred from using false or misleading statements in its marketing and sales of its beauty products, and faced a $1 million fine on top of class action lawsuits from those that, after using the products, claimed they experienced hair loss, balding, and itching. Alexis was a prolific seller of Monat's products, once receiving a check for $10,000 as the winner of a company sales competition. That would certainly make for a lot of women who might blame her for essentially disfiguring them, There's also a decent chance that since Monate's MLM tactics would leave a lot of people out of pocket, that somewhere down the line Alexis had screwed one of her underlings out of a great deal of cash, perhaps just before the news of Monate's subpar products broke in the media, perhaps leaving a person totally unable to shift a hefty amount of stock they'd purchased. This would doubtless leave a person angry, vengeful, maybe even murderous. And besides, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. If this is indeed the case, and Alexis's death is intrinsically linked to her Monate sales, then it seems that her status as an Instagram influencer actually led to her murder. The influence she exerted over those that followed her no doubt led to increased sales, thus increasing the potential pool of victims for Monate's frankly dangerous products. It's very possible that without Instagram, she may not have made the sale to that one person unhinged enough to seek revenge when their skin began to blister, or their hair began to fall out, or their scalp began to itch unbearably. It seems we'll soon find out who's responsible for Alexis's death. But if it is related to social media, it would be very ironic that a medium that has brought opportunity and new beginnings to so many brought one young woman to her end. A few years ago, I started getting into this Italian crime show called Gomorrah. I must have watched every series of The Sopranos like a zillion times, and a friend of mine recommended Gomorrah to me, selling it to me as being like the Italian Sopranos, only 100 times more brutal and bleak. And needless to say, I was hooked, and I binge-watched the first 2 series in like a week, usually with my phone nearby so I could text my buddy like, "Oh God, this show's so amazing," every so often, and thanking him to turning me on to it. Then not long after, I'm scrolling through Instagram and I notice I'm getting Italian language sponsored ads. I figured it was just a glitch in the app's algorithm, something like that, and didn't think anything of it. But it kept happening, over and over again. I get all kinds of ads for different products and services that were only available in Italy. I'm a little embarrassed that it took me as long as it did to make the connection between the Italian advertisements and the fact that I've been watching Gomorrah. But when I finally did, it seriously gave me the creeps. My phone was listening to me. My phone had been broadcasting the sound of the TV series to somewhere that was then tailoring the promoted posts in my Insta feed to stuff it was assumed that I might buy. But then if it was listening to me and sending whatever I was saying off to some advertising company or whatever, there's legit nothing to say that the government can't access with that same technology. For years we worried about the possibility of George Orwell's 1984 becoming a reality, fretting over a totalitarian government that would put cameras or microphones in our homes that they could then use to listen to us. But do you think Orwell could have predicted that we'd do it all voluntarily? That all you had to do was package the telescreen in a tiny, shiny package, couple it with social media, and we'd basically hand over our collective privacy on a silver platter. Like, I might sound legit crazy 20 or 30 years ago if I was all like, they're listening to us, they're spying on us on our phones. But today, it's a matter of record that our devices record ambient noises before analyzing it and passing on keywords to advertisers. And it's not even the fact that it's happening that's the scary part. It's the fact that no one really cares. No one really gives a hoot that we have next to no privacy anymore. I've even heard people talk about Huawei phones like, I don't care if the Chinese have all my info, what are they going to do with it? Now I use VPNs on almost every device I own these days, and I don't own a smartphone anymore. Just a flip phone that I can turn off whenever I'm not using it. I don't think I'd actually use voicemail in about a decade, but now I use it all the time. I just find it extremely creepy that we just sleepwalked into this state of affairs without any more thought than, ooh, my phone now has a camera, or ooh, now my phone has the internet. I used to think those conspiracy theory types were just a bunch of loons, but if they were right about our phones, what else are they right about?
I've been meaning to send my story in for a while now. I think every time I sit down to write it, my hands just hover over the keyboard, and I start questioning if it's even worth telling. But then I remember how I felt that night, that gnawing sensation deep in my gut, the way my skin prickled with adrenaline. And I figured, yeah, this does belong here, so I hope you guys enjoy my story. I've been a fan of Booze and Booze for around a year now, always looking forward to those late night uploads where I could turn the lights off, throw on my headphones, and let the stories wrap around me like a blanket. I never thought I'd have one to share, but this isn't just my story. It's something that happened to me and a coworker back when I was fresh out of high school, working late night shift at a home improvement store. A big one. I'm sure you can guess the name. Between the two of us, I think she got the worst of it. Back then, I was taking my first semester of college classes, scraping together tuition money by working at a regional hardware chain. It wasn't anything glamorous, running a register, handling inventory, mopping up whatever messes customers would leave behind, but it was pretty easy work. I liked most of my coworkers and the pay was decent, and most nights were uneventful. Keyword there being most nights. This one in particular was a pretty slow evening. Everyone was watching the clocks and none of them were moving. We were around an hour from closing. The store had that eerie, half-empty atmosphere that only big retail spaces get after dark. The lights above my head buzzed, casting this sick glow over the aisles, and the air smelled like sawdust and metal. The customers left in the building were the usual stragglers, contractors grabbing last-minute supplies, couples arguing over paint samples, that sort of thing. I was finishing up her return at customer service when she walked up to me. Let's call her Hannah. She was one of the newer hires, maybe a year or two older than me, and usually pretty upbeat. But that night she looked kind of different, tight-lipped, stiff-shouldered. Her eyes darted around like she was expecting something to lunge at her out from the shadows. "Hey," she said, low enough that I could only hear her. "Can you, walk with me for a little bit?" I raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" She swallowed and glanced over her shoulder. "I think I'm being followed." That snapped me to attention. She told me about this man, a big guy, older with a greasy baseball cap and a stare that made her skin crawl. He'd approached her in plumbing, asking her for her help to find a part. Nothing weird at first, but then he just didn't leave. Every time she tried to step away, he found another excuse to keep her there, his questions getting more off topic and more personal. Finally, she made up a reason to leave, and when she checked over her shoulder, he was still there watching her. That was 45 minutes ago. He followed her around the store, and eventually she lost him in power tools, then bolted to the nearest coworker for some kind of assistance. She didn't know where he was at now. I didn't ask any more questions. Hannah was obviously freaked out, and if there was even a chance that some creep was lurking about, I wasn't about to let her wander the store alone. Honestly, this was more exciting than anything work-related anyway, so I prefer to run interference than actually close the store. "Come on," I said, grabbing a clipboard from the counter. Let's look busy." We made our way towards the back aisles, checking inventory, scanning shelves, counting items. Occasionally, my eyes kept flicking up, sweeping the store, but I didn't see anybody out of place. Just a couple of customers near checkout. Donnie in a neon vest was restocking lumber, and one of my other friends was just dicking around on the forklift in the bay. "Are you sure he's still even here?" I whispered. Hannah hesitated. "I don't know, I just feel like he is." For some reason, I just didn't like that answer. We kept moving, aisle by aisle, her sticking close to my side. About 20 minutes later, she seemed to relax a little bit. We hadn't seen the guy at all, and she was starting to think that maybe he did indeed leave. This actually proved to be two birds with one stone because we got a lot of that light inventory work done. And then, that's when I saw him. I was standing near the aisle end cap, watching my buddy do these slow, lazy donuts in the forklift out in lumber, shaking my head at his stupidity. Then I turned back to check on Hannah, only to spot him. He was lurking at the mouth of an aisle, half shielded by the end cap display. It was a big man, mid-50s with a broad chest and slumped shoulders, dressed in these dark jeans and a windbreaker. His baseball cap was pulled really low, but I could see the way he was looking at her. I could also see that this guy was jacked beneath that jacket. Even with the extra layer, his arms were 3 times the size of mine. He stared at Hannah, fixed, unblinking. I could tell his whole body was tense, like he was just waiting for the right moment to do something. This is not good. I forced my face into something neutral and walked back to Hannah, who was maybe 30 feet away, scanning a shelf. I walked right by that weirdo, down the aisle, and put myself between her and the guy, watching from the end of the shelving. I kept my voice casual. "Hey, let's head back to customer service." She frowned at me. "What? Why?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Because he's here, end of the aisle, watching you." Her face paled and I nodded at her, encouraging her that this was pretty serious. "Just walk," I murmured. "Now." She turned stiffly and started moving towards the front of the store, as quick as she could without actually running. I turned back to the aisle, ready for anything. To my relief, he wasn't right on top of me like I was expecting him to be. The man just hadn't moved. I stared him down, gripping my clipboard, fighting the urge to let my hands shake. Then I smiled, the way you do when you're trying to let somebody know that you're not afraid of them. "You need any help finding anything, sir?" His stare didn't even waver. I took a slow step toward him. "We're closing soon, just so you know." His mouth then twitched, somewhere between a grimace and a sneer. I could tell he wanted to say something back to me, but then without a word, he turned and walked off, disappearing down the aisle. I stood there for a few seconds, forcing my breath to stay even, pulse pounding in my ears. I felt like a damn gunslinger. I was glad to have helped out a coworker. And then I went to go find Hannah. She was back at customer service, gripping the counter, body rigid. A small crowd of assistant managers had gathered around her. "Is he gone?" I hesitated. "I don't know. I hope so." "Jesus," she muttered, pressing her hands over her face. "A guy's been watching me all night." "Yeah, he's super creepy. He didn't even say a word to me." We waited until the store officially closed, watching the last customers leave, making sure that he wasn't among them. I didn't see him again. Maybe he had in fact left. Maybe I spooked him. Either way, I was just relieved when we locked those doors. But that relief did not last long. An hour later, the store was empty except for a few employees. Most of us were already clocked out, trickling off to our cars. I stepped outside, the night air sharp and cold, the parking lot stretching dark and quiet around me. I glanced over and saw this single car parked at the far edge of the lot. All the employees parked on a small side lot, so whoever was out there was not an employee. I knew before I even got close. I walked slowly, trying to not look too obvious, heading toward my own car, but fearing just enough to get a good look. A beat-up old sedan idling low, and inside, the same man. His face was barely visible in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, but he was just sitting there, waiting. A deep instinctual alarm flared up in my brain, every nerve firing off at once. Lizard brain, fight or flight. I turned on my heel and made a beeline back to the store. The security office for the strip mall was a few doors down, tucked in between a shuttered electronics store and a laundromat. I knocked on the glass and peered between the blinds. A guy in uniform answered me, maybe late 40s, heavy set, with a bored expression on his face. "Something wrong?" I jerked my thumb over my shoulder. "Yeah, there's a guy parked in the lot. He was inside our store earlier, acting super weird and following my coworker around. Now he's just sitting there." The security guy frowned at me. "He's still there now?" "Yeah, far end of the lot, dark sedan." He grunted. "All right, stay put." I stood there as he climbed into his marked SUV and rolled out into the lot, cruising slow towards that sedan. He stopped behind it and threw his lights on. I watched from a distance as he stepped out and approached the driver's side. A tense few seconds then passed, and then the guy in the sedan just fired up his engine. He didn't speed off though. He didn't make this big scene. He just pulled out, circled the lot, and then exited onto the road, slowly. As he passed me, he looked directly at me, eyes locked onto mine, dark and bottomless. And I swear to God, I felt something press against my chest, something heavy, like he was willing me to die right there on the sidewalk, like he was memorizing me for later. Almost like he was telling me that he would see me again. I watched his taillights vanish off into the dark. My pulse was still hammering in my ears. I only realized that I'd been holding my breath when the security guy rolled back up beside me and leaned out his window. "Yeah, that guy was definitely off," he said, shaking his head. Kept acting like he had some kind of business here, but wouldn't say what. Just kept asking when people left for the night. A chill then coiled up my spine. "What'd you tell him?" "I told him to take a fucking hike," the guard said. "And lucky for you, kid, he did." He eyed me for a second. "You drive straight home, keep an eye out, and if you see him again, call somebody immediately." I just nodded, trying to swallow that lump in my throat. "Good call bringing it to us," he added. "That guy wasn't just loitering, he was definitely waiting." I didn't ask what he meant, but I heard he knew. I hurriedly went back to my car, glancing over my shoulder the whole way, half expecting that old sedan to be idling at the end of the lot again, but it was gone. The entire parking lot was now empty. I locked my doors the second I got inside and just sat there gripping the wheel, forcing myself to catch my breath. Then I pulled out, making sure to check every mirror and every side street. I also took the long way home that night, just in case. For the next few days, I was on edge. Every time I would walk to my car at night, after closing, I half expected to see that sedan parked somewhere in the lot again, headlights off, waiting. We started leaving work in pairs, sticking close to other coworkers. I even told my manager about the whole thing, and he had security do extra sweeps of the property every single night. Thankfully, that guy never came back. Poor Hannah was shaken for a while too. She completely switched up her schedule, so she wouldn't be working nights anymore, which I can't really blame her for. Some nights I wondered if that had been the plan all along, if he'd been waiting for her to leave alone, to see if she got in her car by herself. I never ended up telling her what the security guy said. I didn't want to make her any more scared than she already was. I've actually sent a story into Booze and Booze before. Maybe some of you remember it. It was about my coworker Benji and this weird night shift incident that we had together. It's been a while since I last submitted, but I figured, why not? I'll throw another one your way. And this one's even crazier. I used to work in a call center for a nationwide towing company, the kind of place that stayed open 24/7 to dispatch trucks at all hours of the day and night. The job itself was simple: take calls, input service requests, and then send them out to the right drivers. Since I worked overnights, it was usually dead quiet, which meant I had a lot of downtime. My coworker Benji and I would have the same shifts, and we got along pretty well enough to pass those hours. Our office itself was inside this shared business complex. Nothing special, just a bunch of suites crammed together, totally empty at night. The only thing around that had any life after midnight was the 7-Eleven across the street. That place was a godsend during these long shifts. We'd head over to grab some snacks on break, vape in the parking lot before heading back into the desk. With that being said, it also brought in a little riffraff. Those that remember my last story may recall the details. I went out to use the external bathrooms, and while walking back into the office, I got jumped by a homeless dude that was hanging around one of our dumpsters. Lots of homeless flocked to the 7-Eleven at night, like moths to a flame. That night was like really any other. Calls were pretty slow, office was quiet, and then I'd say around 2 a.m., Benji and I decided to take a break. We lock up and cross the lot and started off towards the gas station. As we were walking, a car whipped into the parking lot really fast, jerking to a stop in front of the store. We both noticed it, but didn't think too much of it. Maybe just some drunk guy making a late night beer run or something. Probably needs a box of condoms, Benji said, laughing. We were halfway across the street when we heard the shouting. At first it was muffled and distant, but then a man's voice cut through the night, barking orders loud and aggressively. The car that had screeched into the lot suddenly tore back off onto the road, disappearing down a side street, tires screaming. And then, through the huge glass windows of the 7-Eleven, we saw a man in a ski mask holding a gun. Benji grabbed my arm. Holy shit. I didn't say anything. I just turned and started walking back toward the office, fast. My pulse was slamming as I kept my eyes on the store. The guy inside was moving in every direction, pointing the gun at the cashier. Then, as if in slow motion, I saw him whip his head toward us, and we weren't alone. Another guy, a second one, also in a mask, came running out of the store. He looked around and then locked eyes with us, and then sprinted straight for us. Benji and I didn't say a word, we just ran. This really felt like something straight out of Grand Theft Auto. We didn't need any logic or instruction. This was real danger. Only one move to be made, and that was just to get the fuck out. We turned around and the two guys outside the 7-Eleven locked on, their footfalls coming up behind us. One of them, the one with the gun, yelled something that I couldn't quite make out, but I don't think I really needed to hear it to understand. This was a chase. Benji was a step ahead of me, already in a full sprint across the parking lot, so I pushed my legs harder, pumping my arms and tried to keep up. Our office was close, just a couple of 100 feet away, but that distance had never felt so damn long until then. Behind us, I heard the first guy's shoe slap against the pavement. He was fast, a lot faster than me. The gunman was trailing behind him, and the other guy, the one who'd been barking orders inside, was gaining ground. I half expected to feel him grab my collar at any second. I risked taking a glance back, and it was a big mistake. The bastard was literally right there, 5 feet away, his ski mask riding up just enough for me to see his mouth twisted up into a snarl. "You're mine!" he shouted. Benji reached for the door first, skidding to a stop, hands fumbling for the keypad. Come on, come on. I could hear the beeping as he punched in the code. My feet hit the landing of the building and we were almost there. But then something slammed into my back and I went down hard, my chin bouncing off the concrete. My teeth clacked together, pain exploding through my jaw. The weight of the guy was on me in an instant, his hands clawing at my jacket, trying to turn me over. Fuck! I gasped out, twisting and kicking out blindly. My shoe connected with something soft, a stomach, maybe his groin, and the guy let out this grunt, loosening his grip just enough for me to roll free. Benji was screaming my name the whole time. "Get the fuck up, dude, get up!" I scrambled to my feet, blood in my mouth, world tilting. The guy then lunged again, grabbing at my sleeve, but I ripped free, hurled myself towards the door. Benji had it open just enough for me to squeeze through, and the second I was inside, he threw his weight against it, trying to slam it shut. But the guy outside was not giving up easily. It was the other guy, the one with the gun, giving it everything he had trying to get inside. A hand then shot through the gap. Thick fingers clawed at the air trying to grab at us. Benji grunted and shoved harder. "Dude, help me!" I threw myself against the door. The guy outside let out this furious roar, pushing back, fingers scraping against my arm the whole time. For a split second, I really thought he was about to win. I thought he was gonna get it open. If that happened, we'd be fucked for sure. But then from outside, I heard, "Move!" A gunshot exploded through the night. That sound was deafening in the enclosed space. I felt the impact of it on my chest like a punch from the inside. The guy outside cursed, jerking back, and we took the chance. Benji slammed the door shut and locked it into place. Silence. I staggered backward. My hands were shaking, adrenaline pouring through me like ice water. Neither of us were hit, thankfully, so we assumed they tried to shoot the door or the building, maybe even just up in the air to scare us. Benji was panting, staring at the door. "Dude." Another bang. The guy outside punched the glass full force. Another bang. Again, bang. I could see his silhouette through the narrow windows. His breath was fogging up the glass. His posture was rigid with rage. His friend was standing right beside him, the gunman, and the two of them started circling the building, checking the windows and the other doors. "We gotta go to the back office now," Benji said, grabbing my sleeve. "Go, go." We ran deeper into the office, past empty desks and silent cubicles. The security office was in the back, just big enough for a desk and a few filing cabinets, and one single chair. But the door was solid wood, with a steel sheet inside of it, and it had a deadbolt. We threw ourselves inside and slammed it shut, locking it immediately. Outside, that banging continued. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and punched in 911. Operator immediately answering.
911, what's your emergency?
"There's two guys trying to break into our office," I said. "One of them has a gun." Benji sat against the wall, gripping his knees, and his chest was heaving. "Are you in a safe location?" the dispatcher asked. It was kind of funny to hear that question. As a roadside assistant operator, that was literally the opening line of our script. "I think so," I said. "We're locked inside a back office." From outside, we heard another boom, and that sound made me jump. "What the fuck?" Benji hissed. I could tell he was getting agitated. I didn't have to wander for very long. I could hear weird faded beeps from outside. The keypad. They shot the damn keypad. "They're trying to get in," I whispered. Benji wiped his face, sweat slick on his forehead. "Shit, man, shit. This is crazy. We're like fish in a barrel. We should have never ran back in here." The dispatcher was still talking to me, but I barely heard any words she said. I was far too busy listening to the sounds of outside, the muffled voices, the hurried footsteps, the gunman cursing underneath his breath. I heard another shot, then nothing. The silence stretched on, and I could hardly take a breath. That's when I heard sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the walls in frantic colors. Benji let out this breathless laugh, half hysteria, half relief. "Oh shit, man. Holy shit." We stayed locked in that room until the cops banged on the door and announced themselves. That's when we finally stepped out, and I got my first real look at the damage. The front door was a complete mess. Bullet holes in the keypads, cracked spider webbing across the glass. The cops questioned us, and we gave our statements, still shaking, still reeling. The two guys were long gone, disappeared off into the neighborhood, but we knew one thing for sure. They wanted us dead. And if we would have been a second slower, we would have been. The second we stepped out, it really hit me how close we'd actually been to dying. That front door was ruined. The keypad was a mangled mess of metal and shattered plastic. Bullet holes pocked the frame. A thin wisp of dust still curled from where the gunman had tried and failed to blast his way inside. A couple of the officers were already sweeping the area, flashlights cutting off through the dark. Another was waiting for us, notepad in hand. "Fellas okay?" he asked. Benji just barked out a laugh, the full weight of the situation finally washing over him. "Yeah, just fucking fantastic." I barely recognized my own voice when I spoke. Were they caught?" The cop shook his head. "They took off on foot before we arrived. We got units combing the area though, but no sign of them yet." Benji just ran a hand through his hair. "Jesus Christ." The next 30 minutes were just a blur of questions and police chatter. We told him everything about the robbery, about the chase, about the fight at the door. An officer took photos of my arm where the guy had clawed at me. Another pointed out a smear of blood on the doorframe, the pavement where I fell. "Damn, they wanted in bad," one of the cops muttered, eyeing those bullet holes. "Yeah, no shit." Our boss, the owner-operator of the call center, showed up just after 3 a.m. He was an older guy, tough but fair. He looked at the damage with that kind of weary sigh that said he was already adding up the cost inside of his head. "Jesus, boys," he said, rubbing a hand over his face. "You okay?" Benji was just staring at the shot-up door, jaw tight. I nodded at him. "Yeah." Our boss exhaled. "Well, you're done for the night. Go home and get some sleep. You're both on paid leave until this mess is sorted out." We didn't argue. We were far too wrung out, too drained. Benji drove me home and we barely spoke on the way there. But when I shut my apartment door behind me and locked it, that's when I finally let myself breathe a little and realized that my hands were still shaking. Those guys had been out for blood. And if we'd been just a second slower, we would have given it to them.
I don't work nights anymore, but for years I worked the night shift in a residential care facility. On weekends, I was the only person in charge of a dementia facility. It was sometimes spooky, consisting of 15 residents and only me to keep an eye on them all throughout the night. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, after doing an intentional round where I checked on all the residents and they were safe and well, I heard the doorbell ring. I got a sudden wave of goosebumps because this was a secure facility and it was the middle of the night. I went and looked out of the window, but there was nobody there. I blew it off as being a hallucination because I was exhausted most of the nights. About 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again, so I went back to the window and checked again. Nobody was there, but I looked across the street and a strange car was parked there. I took a photo of it just in case, and then I went back to my station where I had been playing a game of cards with a delightful but very demented lady. I sat down and she looked at me and said, "What did the gentleman want, dearie?" Chills went down my spine, but I brushed it off because hallucinations are common with dementia, and this lady is particularly prone to not being oriented to time and place. However, the doorbell rang again less than 5 minutes later, and this time I was getting scared. Another one of my residents was awake and walking in the hallway, painting with a clean paintbrush to keep him occupied. I passed him on the way to the front window, and he turned to me and said, "Don't answer the door alone, he might hurt you," before continuing to pretend to paint. I looked out of the window to see the same car as before, and as I was looking around, I saw a shadow moving in front of the door. A person walked around the corner and then looked straight into the window next to me. We made direct eye contact, and it was essentially a jump scare for me, so I was startled and screamed. My residents started freaking out, and the guy on the other side of the door ran away. I called the police, and they showed up shortly after. It was straight chaos at that point, because I had 15 residents who all had been woken by the commotion, and 2 police officers in the building now also. Eventually, with the help of the 2 kind officers, I was able to get everybody settled down, but it took a while. I eventually learned from the cops that there was a woman down the road whose house was broken into. She was attacked in bed by someone who ransacked her house looking for drugs. I can't help but wonder if it was the same person from earlier that night intentionally trying to get into my facility for the drugs that are kept there. I'm grateful that our whole facility was so secure, and apparently the culprit just took the next best option. A strange part of the story that I'll never understand is how 2 of my patients knew that there was a man out there who wanted to enter and potentially hurt me. They were never close enough to the door to look out of the window and see anyone. It feels like one of those eerie guardian angel moments, or just a strange coincidence. I left that job not long after because they refused to hire a second person to work the nights, despite being understaffed according to best practice guidelines. I worked at a water treatment plant on the graveyard shift. The place was isolated, situated next to a highway that connected 2 cities about an hour apart. Nothing but some empty fields and trees were in between. It would just be me there during the night shift. My job, and why I had to be there, was to check the levels, adjust equipment every now and then, and basically just make sure that everything was working and it wasn't going to blow up. During my shift, I would be inside an 8-foot-tall barbed wire fence which was locked, but the access door to the rest of the facility were always open. One night at about 2:30 or 3 a.m., I was sitting in my control room area killing time on my Nintendo DS. The sound of the game was the only thing breaking the silence, and I was halfway zoning out when I heard a voice from behind me. The voice shouted out to get on the ground. I turned around and saw a guy standing there behind me holding a gun. He must have climbed the barbed wire fence to get to me, because I could see he was bleeding from several locations on his body. I must have been taking a while to comprehend what was happening, because the man yelled to get on the ground again. I didn't hesitate this time, and I dropped to my knees. He kept the gun pointed at me as he stepped closer. I remember that he kept apologizing to me, saying that he was sorry, but he had to do this. I thought that maybe he had been hired to kill me by someone, and what could I have possibly done to deserve this? He began asking for my truck keys, my wallet, and my phone. I didn't argue, and I handed everything over. Next, he tied me up. He used some duct tape that was near my desk, wrapping it around my wrists and my ankles. I still had no idea if I was going to die soon, or maybe I was being kidnapped and that's why he was tying me up. After a few minutes, the guy backed away. He apologized again, and then he turned and walked out of the room. I heard the sound of my truck starting up, and then the tires crunching the gravel as he drove away. For a moment, I just sat there, totally in shock, trying to calm myself down. The duct tape wrapped around my wrists and ankles wasn't the greatest, and I was able to free myself after a while. I used the emergency phone at the water treatment facility and called the police, and they said they would send someone right away. When the cops came, they asked me a bunch of questions, wrote down everything I could remember, and arranged for a way home for me. The next day, I found out the guy was arrested in the town over. He'd apparently escaped from an inmate custody transport a few days before and had been on the run ever since. The police said he was desperate, probably running out of options, and that he had likely walked a long way to get to the water plant. That made sense considering how far in the middle of nowhere the plant was. I even got all my stuff back besides the cash in my wallet because he had been caught trying to pawn off my stuff in the next town over. I think about that night often and have had to go to some therapy for it. The man was obviously desperate, and maybe he had thought about killing me, since it would likely have given him more time to escape, as the cops would have been called much later. There have been some other strange occurrences that happened while I was working the night shift job, but this one was easily the scariest thing that I ever experienced there. Many years ago, I used to work a night shift at a hotel in South Carolina. During the summer season, it wasn't so bad, mostly families. We had on-site security during the summer also. However, the winter months were different. The cheap weekly rates we'd offer attracted a lot of creepy people. The idea was to make money in the off-season by renting to what is known as snowbirds, older retired people who come to the beach for a month or so through the winter. It did not always work out that way though. The cheap rates made it possible for less than desirable people to become long-term residents. I've discovered more than my fair share of meth labs, broken up physical assaults, and more during the winter months. Working the night shift, I would meet some interesting people. I have a lot of stories from the night shift, but this one is the one that stands out because it did not end well for me. I began working at midnight and hung out with my friend Andrew. Andrew worked late-night maintenance shifts at this hotel and 2 other hotels that our company owned. He would regularly stop by after work and go grab us some food, and we'd hang out and talk since business was so slow. We had just ordered food, and he was getting ready to leave and go pick it up. I was just walking into the office to grab some money from my wallet to give it to Andrew when I heard the doorbell indicating a customer had entered. I had just come back and reached the doorway back to the lobby area when I saw Andrew just fall down in front of me. Next thing I knew, a guy walked around the corner and punched me in the head with a short steel pipe in his hand. It staggered me and I went on one knee. He hit me in the head with the pipe, and the only thing I remember was his partner saying that Andrew got away and found a cop, so they had to go now. I was finally able to get to my feet from the blow I received. I tried to call the police from the phone in the back office, but it was having issues. I slammed it in frustration. I was hurt, scared, and really freaking out. I realized they could come back, so I ran to lock the door. I don't know where Andrew had gone, and that worried me. I finally got the phone to work, and I told the 911 operator that I had been attacked, and I needed an officer and an ambulance. I didn't unlock the front door until the cops and ambulance pulled up. It was at this time, after I found out they punched and knocked him down, that Andrew had been able to amazingly jump over the desk and escape. He luckily ran outside as a cop was driving by, which he ran to flag down for help. I ended up in the hospital ER where I had to have 10 staples in my head, and they gave me morphine for pain. I thought I had only been hit in the head once after being punched, but I was later shown the video from the hotel cameras, and the video showed a different story. After I went to one knee, the guy hit me not just one time, but 10 total times. I kept trying to grab the pipe and get up for some reason. I do not remember any of this happening. He kept punching me and hitting me with the pipe until his accomplice told me that Andrew got away and flagged down a cop. We never found out why they chose to attack me. The police thought it might be a failed robbery attempt due to Andrew getting away and me not just going down. The only other explanation I could think of was someone was getting revenge on me for one of the many incidents I had to deal with while working the night shift. For example, maybe someone was getting back at me for a physical assault that I broke up in a room, or the meth labs I had discovered. Once I recovered, I came back to work the night shift for a bit, but I had PTSD and was very nervous it might happen again, so I ended up finding a different job. They never caught the guys who did it as far as I know. I used to work night shifts at this large manufacturing facility. The night shift consisted of a very small crew, including 5 security workers and 5 of us doing administration and packing. As administration staff, I sat with security as they'd switch between patrolling and monitoring the cameras. It was usually silent and boring. One night near Halloween, I was halfway into my shift on my lunch hour break. It was chilly, and I went to my car to grab my bigger jacket and have a smoke break. I was right outside the back door where this fence is closest to the building. It's maybe 10 yards off the back door. The only light was motion activated, and I had to keep making grand arm movements to keep it on. It's all grass and shadows up to the fence, and the light doesn't really hit that far. I was watching videos on my phone, and the light went out from a lack of motion. I sat in the dark a bit, sipping my coffee and finishing my cigarette. As I was finishing, I reached up and waved to activate the light to find the ashtray, but as the light flickered on, I heard a noise on the fence across from me. We do get some animals out there, and they could get startled, but as I stood up, I heard the fence keep slightly jiggling. When I looked up, I didn't see much. The light didn't really illuminate much outside its circle on the ground. My first thought was to say hello, which I did in a questioning tone. When I spoke, the sound stopped for a moment. I squinted into the darkness trying to adjust, but it was hard with the light on. However, once the light turned off again, the light from the moon had a little bit more effect lighting up the area. The fence started jiggling again. As my eyes adjusted better, I saw movement. It looked like a person opposite me at the fence fidgeting with the links. I thought this must be a kid just trying to spook us. Maybe they were going to break in and explore, which some kids had done before without knowing the building never closed. But it wasn't common, and this was one person, alone. I was worried, so I radioed to desk security with my walkie-talkie. I informed security that we had a visitor outside the fence on the north end of the building. I've seen the monitors of camera feed, and I know this area is totally covered by cameras. They would be able to check the fence clearly. My walkie beeped back, and the security guy said, "We aren't reading any movement at the fence. Is it in the tree line?" I responded back no, and they were fiddling with the fence right in front of me. The next events all happened so fast. Security didn't even have the chance to reply to me when from the fence, I heard this massively louder thrash of the lynx, and all I saw was a figure full-on sprinting at me. I spilled my coffee all over as I rushed back inside the building. I pushed myself inside and held the knob in place, trying to keep the deadbolt in place. The knob was flicking down hard against my hold. I could hear and feel something moving against the opposite side of the door. By the time security got down to me, I had the deadbolt in place, and the knob of the door was still now. I didn't understand why the security workers weren't taking me seriously while I explained the story, until I saw the playback from the cameras. It was just me outside. There was nothing there. I immediately thought this was a big prank on me, but everyone else genuinely thought that I was the one fooling them. Upon watching the footage a second time more closely, however, we noticed the way the door handle kept moving even when I removed my hand from it. Both the inside camera and outside caught it. We also noticed right before I panicked and turned to run inside, the fence made a slight jolt as if it was pushed. There were no holes in the fence or any kind of cuts made where somebody could squeeze through. There were no creepy shadows or unexplained wisps of smoke or light or movement besides those. Nobody there wanted to admit anything happened to me. Everyone came up with logical explanations like it was tricks of the moonlight, an overactive imagination, or too much coffee. I didn't want to argue about it. They already thought that I was being weird about it. I went about finishing my shift, but nobody used the back door again that night, and it remained locked. The longest employed security employee was finishing up his shift at the desk with me in the office that night. A few minutes before clocking out, he cleared his throat and told me, "I never really liked that north end. It feels like someone's eyes are always on me." It's honestly the most he's ever said to me in the years plus I worked there, the most I ever heard him say. I felt like the statement held even more weight from that alone. I worked there another 7 months and never had another incident. I never actually went out there again though. I stopped smoking, took my breaks out in the lobby, or wasted time chatting with coworkers. I made any excuse not to go out by that door again. I've never before or since had any moments where I felt like my imagination got the better of me, and I truly believe that wasn't the case here. I keep thinking back to that door handle jerking down when I was not touching it anymore. That had to be proof I wasn't imagining the whole thing. I worked overnight at a Subway inside a 24-hour truck stop, which wasn't the most glamorous job, but it kept the bills paid. Most of the time, it was quiet, especially after the regular truckers had eaten and left for the night. I was behind the counter one night, cleaning up some stuff, when this guy came in. He was just standing there staring at the menu, and then he asked me if I had a sandwich for him. At first, I thought he might have called in an order or something, so I asked him his name to look it up. That's when he stepped forward a bit. and I saw that he was covered in blood, soaked through his shirt, splattered his jeans, and dripping onto the floor. It was dark in the store, and I didn't realize how bad it was until I saw the red. It wasn't a little bit either. He was really covered in it. I froze for a second, and then he told me that I didn't need to know his name and to just make him a sandwich. I didn't want the guy to panic, so I tried to stay calm and think of the best way to notify someone. While making his sandwich, I thought of an excuse to go to the back of the store, saying that I needed to get more lettuce since the bin was almost done. I signaled to my other coworker who was relaxing in the back before her shift started to go get the off-duty state trooper who worked security around that time. A few minutes later, I saw the trooper finally coming into the store as I was finishing up with the man's sandwich. The trooper saw the trail of blood on the floor and the guy's stare, and it was obvious that something was seriously wrong. He must have had years of experience with things like this, because he moved in slow and steady, pretending he was just there for a sandwich, and got close. But the second he got close, the guy tensed up like he was about to bolt. The trooper stepped forward and grabbed him as the guy tried to pull away, but the trooper was faster. The man covered in blood was arrested and then questioned. The guy had been stabbed, but he didn't even know how bad it was because he was in shock. Apparently, he'd stabbed someone to death earlier that night, and the shock he had made him so disoriented he didn't even realize how badly he was bleeding. He'd been driving around, gassing up his car at the pump just a few feet away, and getting food to go on the run. He was just some guy who walked in wanting a sandwich, acting like it was no big deal while covered in blood after a murder. It was a chilling experience for me having to deal with something like that while working a night shift job. Back in the 90s when I was in high school, I was very good with my hands and worked jobs like construction, demolition, flooring, and auto mechanics. One of the jobs I did was working for a guy doing remodeling projects, like at restaurants, bars, retail shops, and typical commercial projects. I went to school during the day, of course, and would sometimes work after school or weekends. For the guy I worked for, it wasn't uncommon for him to leave me alone at a site and have a list of things for me to do alone, mostly demolition work. He picked me up one Saturday morning as I didn't have a car or license yet, so he would pick me up and drive me to sites for work and then leave me alone there. I rarely worked with his other crews as they were the more skilled laborers, so I would tear up the place before the main crew would come in and do all the remodeling. Here's the part that was my major downfall to this story. I didn't pay attention to where we were going. I was too busy talking to him, and I think we were talking about cars or something. It took a long time to get to the site, and as we drove up, it was in the middle of nowhere in the Mojave Desert. I knew we left the highway and went down a few other two-lane highways for a long distance, but I had no idea where we were. I had a big jug of water with me because the water to the house I would be working at was off. When we pulled up to the house, I pulled all my tools out of the truck before he left, and he then drove to another site that he would be working on. He told me that he would be back to pick me up at about 5 or 6 p.m., since it should only take me until then to do what I needed to do. That was always his way of saying, I'm only paying you till this time, so you better get everything done by then. It was never unfair, and we always had a good understanding on time and tasks. He drove away, and I was at this property all alone. I walked into the house, and it was mostly empty. My job was to remove all the remaining furniture, contents, and appliances, remove all the flooring, gut the kitchen and bathroom, and remove all the wood paneling. I was used to being on sites alone and working all night, and this was in the daytime on a Saturday, but the house kind of gave me the spooks. The house was old, dark, musty, and kind of cool inside, the kind of cool that gives you the goosebumps. I started removing all the junk from the house as I normally did on a project. I tore up all the flooring next, and to my delight, everything seemed to come up with ease, and it was rip, cut, and toss. I took a big demo hammer to the kitchen and tore it apart in less than an hour. I ended up using the big jug of water that my boss had given me to wash my hands and face periodically, so by late afternoon, I was down to my last drink and had already ate everything I brought. No worries though, because I would be getting picked up in a couple of hours. I finished all my tasks and even swept the entire place so the next crew could get right to work later that week. At that time of year when I was out there, it wasn't a typical hot desert day, but you know in the desert, as soon as the sun goes down, it starts to cool rapidly. I had a flannel shirt, but that wasn't enough, and it was starting to get dark. My ride was running late, so all I could do was wait. This was the time before cell phones were common, and there was no electricity, water, or phone service in the house. I climbed up to get to the top of the roof of the house to get a better look to see if I could see something in the distance. Miles down a smaller road, I saw a few homes, but those homes were all dark. My first thought was to hike down to a neighbor's house and ask them to use a phone. I didn't want to leave though, in fear of missing my ride, especially since it didn't look like anyone was home since no lights were on in any houses. I started to think about my options as darkness approached fast. My options were either to stay at the house until morning, hike what little water I had a few miles in the desert at night, or wait until early morning and hike out there to some sort of civilization. I decided my best option was to just stay and hope that my ride would show up. It also suddenly occurred to me that no one knew where I was except my boss. I don't know if he told anyone else where I was either. My family wouldn't miss me until maybe Sunday night because they knew me and how much I would work, and they never worried about me not coming home. As full darkness was all around me, I didn't have a flashlight or any way to make a fire, but luckily the moonlight was bright. It was getting cold outside, so I went back inside the empty, creepy house that somehow seemed even more creepy when mostly empty. At about 8 p.m., the batteries on my radio, which was my only source of a little light and noise, started to die. I grabbed an old wooden chair and just sat in the living room of this house doing absolutely nothing except waiting. I started to hear the wind and odd noises, which I assumed were animals in the distance. I started to shiver from the cold, and my mind might have started to play tricks on me. I saw shadows moving outside and inside the house. I also started to hear someone talking, like whispers or something. I was sure I was going crazy and got up from my chair and yelled out hello, and just as I did, I heard something fall on the other side of the house. I had enough of this creepy house, so I went to go outside again. At least in the moonlight I could see better. Off in the distance I heard noises and saw movement, but couldn't make out anything. I had a pile of tools by the edge of the house ready for when my boss picked me up, so I ran over there and grabbed a heavy pry bar. I was ready to defend myself for whoever was out there. I had to keep moving, because my undershirt and flannel shirt were not enough to keep me warm. The wind was also starting to pick up, and as far as I could see, there was no lights around me. I didn't want to try to make it up on the house again out of fear of falling in the dark, but I got up on top of the gate just to try to gain a little bit of height to see if I could see some house lights nearby or car lights. My mind went to the stories that circled around at the time, about people who would come up to the Mojave Desert and bury bodies, how there were evil groups out here, and how people would go missing for no reason. Every noise had me on edge, and every shadow had my heart pounding. I knew no one was in the house, but I was sure I could hear noises from inside. I huddled up on the front porch for warmth, looking in the living room window, expecting to see someone at any moment. By around 11 p.m., I looked at my watch, thinking this was going to be a long night, as all this stuff only happened since it got dark. I didn't know how I was going to make it for another 6 hours until daybreak. Closer to midnight, I was wide awake. My eyes were only fixed on the dirt road, thinking that any time now a car would come down and maybe they could help me. I remember casually turning around to look back to the house, because all this time I kept hearing noises, but I told myself it was a rat or some animal. I saw a shadow of a person moving from the kitchen to down the hall. I jumped up from sitting and started backing my way out of the porch away from the house. As I was backing up, I tripped over the debris pile and fell down on the ground. I tried to get up, but fell again. It was like something pushed me down, or my imagination, but all of a sudden these bright lights were coming closer to me as I was laying on the ground. I saw my boss standing above me with a flashlight, wondering what I was doing on the ground. I was just so glad to see him. I wasn't mad. I just asked him what happened. He said that he was sorry, but he thought the other crew was coming to get me, and they thought he was coming, so no one actually came. He said it wasn't until later in the evening he asked the other crew leader about how far along the house I had got, and that's when they realized I was still out there. My boss felt really bad and told me he was going to pay me for the entire time I was out there. As he was driving me home, I asked about the house and told him how creepy it was. He said he didn't have any information on the house and only just knew what we were supposed to do. I don't know if I was going delusional or something, but that time I spent out there by myself, lost in the middle of the desert at night, was the scariest night of my life. What was so weird is I never saw any headlights of a car approaching. My only memory of being rescued was seeing my boss standing over me with his flashlight. I'm not exactly sure what happened that night, but it was so creepy. After that, I made sure to always keep extra batteries, a flashlight, and double the amount of liquid with me.
He wasn't my blood uncle. He was my biological aunt's brother-in-law. My mom used to date sketchy guys when I was a teenager. I didn't live with her much because she was a horrible role model. So my grandmother raised me for a big chunk of my life, and I am thankful for that because she taught me many values and how to be a lady. I later moved in with my father and stepmother and my half-siblings when I was around 15, and I had a wonderful life with them. But let's rewind the clock to when I was 14. At the time, I lived with my mother and her sleazy boyfriend named Dale. We were on the second story of a duplex. Her boyfriend had this friend who would come over occasionally, who looked just like the white guy from Jerky Boys. Same hair too. He always creeped me out because he kept staring at me, and I would always catch him in the act. My aunt lived down the block, and I would visit her quite frequently because she was one of those cool aunts. She was in her 20s, super fun, and had this 1969 Firebird convertible that she would drive around in and blast rock music. When I would visit her house, I would sometimes run into her brother-in-law. His name was Jeff, Uncle Jeff. He was renting out her basement. I kind of thought he was weird, but an okay guy. So one night at around 11:30, I was home by myself when I get a knock on the door. Our door had a square glass panel toward the top that was painted over, with a small peephole scratched into it. When I looked through, I could see that it was Jeff on the other side. I opened the door. "Oh, hey Jeff, what's up? Hey, is your mom or Dale home?" "No, mom's at work, and I don't know where Dale is." He then asked me to come downstairs because he wanted to talk to me. This didn't raise any red flags because I considered him family. I was also pretty timid and didn't like saying no to people, especially adults. So I follow him downstairs to the front porch. I see his car is parked and still running with the headlights on. Sitting in the passenger seat with the window rolled down was the other creepy guy I alluded to earlier, Jerky Boy. I paused. What's he doing here?" Hey, relax. We just want to talk. We wanted to ask you something." He began to gently guide me toward the car. My adrenaline began pumping, and all of a sudden, I felt something wasn't right. I stopped and pulled back a little, trying my best not to look scared. Jeff kept talking sweetly, running his finger up my shoulder to fix my spaghetti strap. "Oh, it's okay. Just come closer to me. There's no reason to be afraid." I pulled away politely and said, "Whatever it is you need to ask me, you can ask me right here." He kept trying to convince me just to come to the car and said that if I was too scared, I could just stand in front of the headlights. The second he said that, my stomach did a leap and my whole body started to feel electrically charged because I knew if I stood in front of the headlights, I would not be able to see, making it easy for one of them to grab me. At that very moment, I knew I was in a dangerous situation. So I started acting ditzy and dumb because I was afraid to let them know that I was onto them and that they were doing something that would land them in prison. And he would just grab me right then and there, cover my mouth, and drag me into the car so that I couldn't tell anyone. So I started to playfully joke around and said that I wasn't wearing shoes and that I didn't want to step in dog shit. I could see that Jerky Boy was now starting to come out of his car. Then I sprinted back upstairs, running as fast as I could and locking the door behind me. I was shaking so bad. Not a minute later, Jerky Boy is knocking on the door, and he's looking through the makeshift peephole. He starts saying that he needs to talk to my mom's boyfriend, Dale. I say that he's not here, so he stops knocking, but I don't hear him descending the stairs. 30 seconds after that, Jeff comes up and knocks, and is talking to me through the door, saying that he needed to talk to Dale, and then tries opening the door. However, it's locked. For the third time, I repeat that Dale wasn't there. "Oh, I'm sorry if we scared you, sweetheart. We just wanted to talk to you." That was bullshit. I was afraid that they were going to try to kick the door in, so I decided that I was going to try and sneak out the back. I walked toward the back door, and thank God I looked out the window first, because I saw the silhouette of Jerky Boy standing downstairs at the back door. So now, Jeff was at the front door, trying to sweet-talk me, and his friend was waiting out back. I know what you're probably thinking. Call the cops. I don't know why I didn't. I know it's stupid. I think it was because I was so naive and timid. Jeff was my uncle after all. I was also questioning myself and my own judgments, because Jeff kept reassuring me at the front door. So I returned to the front door, and Jeff is still there, telling me that he felt horrible for scaring me. I then tell him, trying my best to disguise any hint of fear in my voice, that everything was okay, and that I was so sorry that I got scared. I tried my best to placate him and convince him that I believed what he told me. They eventually left, and once the coast was clear, I snuck out and ran to a friend's house. I didn't tell them anything about what happened. I just said that I was scared and wanted to stay there until my mom got home. I did tell my mother about what happened, but nothing ever came of it. And thankfully I moved into my dad's house 45 miles away 3 months later. I never saw those two men again. When I was in elementary school, my parents worked long hours and wouldn't get off until it was very late in the day. I would stay in an after-school program that took place in our cafeteria. Not because I had to, but because it was more conducive with my parents' schedule. It usually consisted of doing homework and playing board games until around 5 p.m. Even then, some kids would be waiting around the pickup area for an hour or even more, and I would join them while a chaperone waited with us. I was almost always the last kid to be picked up, so whenever I would leave, so would the assigned chaperone. One day, the chaperone really needed to use the restroom. That day we were the last ones in the pickup area. He told me not to leave until he got back. So I was sitting there on the ground against the wall, when suddenly, a car pulled up. A bearded man in a flannel shirt and dark sunglasses lowered the passenger window and said, "Come on, let's go. Your dad can't pick you up today. I'm your uncle." I just sat there gripping my backpack, staring at him, completely frozen. I didn't recognize him, and I was scared, so I didn't say anything. I was confused, and I didn't know what to do. Could this guy really be my uncle? Had something happened to my dad? The man seemed to get impatient, and with a stern voice, he said, "Get in the car now. Your dad got hurt. We need to go see him. Hurry." I still sat there, not moving. It was then that the chaperone returned, and as soon as he appeared, the car sped off. The chaperone wasn't able to get the license plate number and told my parents about it when they came to pick me up. From that day on, the school took extra precautions and assigned more chaperones to watch the children after school, which was a good thing. But I still wonder what would have happened if I believed him and naively went with him. He also must have been watching us for some time, because he showed up as soon as the chaperone left. This could have easily happened to a student who was younger than me, who wouldn't have known better. It's sad, but not everyone knows about stranger danger. Just watch your local news. When I was 15 years old, my great-uncle passed away due to a sudden heart attack. My father and I had to clean out his house since no one else in the family could do it. My uncle was loved by all of us and was one of the nicest guys you could ever meet. My father was broken up about losing him, but the job had to be done. His house was very neat and well organized, so we would be done in a day or two at most. I remember as a kid, we would play over at his house sometimes, whenever my parents had to work. He would allow us to play anywhere in the house, except for the attic. He made it very clear to us that going up and down the ladder to the attic was very dangerous. Therefore, we never went up there, and I never thought anything of it. Even though he would go up there sometimes for about 30 minutes, then come back down, never actually bringing anything with him or taking anything up there. While we were cleaning, I decided to finally go up to the attic just to see what was up there. It was completely empty, except for 2 boxes that were tucked away in a corner. Thinking nothing of it, I picked up the dusty boxes and took them downstairs to the living room. I opened them expecting to see some old papers because the boxes were so light. Instead, what I found were pictures. Hundreds and hundreds of photos of 3 different women. From all the angles, you could clearly tell they didn't know they were being photographed. He had pictures from daytime to night and from multiple locations. In some they were undressed, and in others they were doing everyday things like cleaning and cooking. My heart started to beat faster and faster. Looking closer, I realized one of the women was his wife, who had passed away several years earlier. I looked on the back of the pictures, and they were named. I didn't want to freak my family out without knowing what exactly I was looking at. So out of curiosity, I found the other 2 names of the women on Facebook. I was glad to find out that they were alive and okay. Once finding that out, I showed the pictures to my father, and he was just as shocked as I was. He took the boxes, and I've never seen them again, and we never spoke of it. Still, I find myself wondering why he had those pictures, and if he took them himself or had someone else take them. I loved my great uncle very much, and I couldn't imagine him being anything less than a stand-up guy. I don't know what to make of this, to be honest. I know this may not seem like a very scary story, but it most certainly freaked my father and I out pretty bad. Before I begin, I'm from Russia. My English isn't that great, but I'll try my best. I was really struggling on whether or not I wanted to share this story because I am still disturbed and shaken up to this day. I grew up in a wealthy family. Both of my parents had enough money to get me into the best schools in Russia, and I remember going to many places during the summer breaks, and to this day, those are still my fondest memories. My parents had steady jobs, and they were mostly happy together. However, my father was never very fond of my mother's side of the family, especially my uncle and both of my grandparents. For whatever reason, they didn't get along with my dad. My mom tried pleasing everyone, lending them money, even though they would never pay her back. However, things got to a point where they turned on each other. My uncle really wanted my grandparents' house, even though he already had a huge house of his own. However, the house would go to my mother after they passed away, to square off any debts. He didn't really like this arrangement, but couldn't do anything about it. As fate would have it, both of my grandparents died in the same year. My grandfather had a condition where his left side was completely paralyzed. He slipped into a coma for a week before he woke up. His last words to this day have resonated with me. He told my uncle that he never got what he wanted because he was a greedy bastard. A couple of hours later, my grandfather passed away. My grandmother's health deteriorated not long after that. My mother became very depressed after this and was diagnosed with breast cancer the next year. Thankfully, she is still alive today, but she is not the same as she used to be. She had to stop going to work because she couldn't handle the stress. My father tried opening up a new business because he made the mistake of listening to my cousin. My father was hesitant at first, but my mother convinced him to do it. Since she didn't have a job, this could be something that she could occupy her time with. My father invested a lot of money into opening up this new business. My cousin was also heavily involved and influenced my father in all his investments. By the time he finalized everything, our financial future depended on this business being successful. He was risking a lot. By this time I was in high school, while my sister was going to college. This was when the worst possible thing happened to my family. The business that my father invested so much money into did not go as planned, and he ended up closing it down. He tried selling it off, but nobody bought it for the longest time. We were now broke and asking loan sharks for money. We couldn't go anywhere. I was too embarrassed to tell my friends or anyone else for some reason. While all this was happening, my uncle had moved into my grandparents' house and would ignore my mom's calls, even though my grandparents' will clearly stated the house belonged to my mother. My uncle built a fence so that nobody could trespass. The police were no help at all, and we had no money to hire someone to help us move him out of there, and we also couldn't fight him in court. As bad as things were, the worst was yet to come. We ended up being evicted from our house, unable to pay our mortgage with most of our things now belonging to the loan sharks. I spent an entire week homeless in the winter with my parents, and if you know anything about Russia, it gets rather cold there. These were the most painful days of my life. We ended up staying at a shelter. My mother tried ending her own life a couple of times, but we would always intervene. No one wanted to help my family. Until one day I got a call from a childhood friend. Her name was Olga. Her family agreed to take me in, until my parents got back on their feet. Olga's father had a close friend who was a lawyer and said that he would look into the case regarding my grandparents' house. My mother was the rightful owner, but the Russian police would not lift a finger until they had a court order, which would cost money, which is something we didn't have. That's how things work over here. For the next 6 months, I stayed at Olga's place, and we grew closer than ever, and even started dating. During this time, I eventually went back to school. The lawyer told my parents that he would be able to repossess my grandparents' house. On the day of the hearing, it took the judge 2 seconds after reviewing my grandfather's will. But my uncle still refused to cooperate, which was a big mistake. Here in Russia, the police do not mess around. I remember watching him being dragged through the snow, beaten until he was unconscious, and then thrown into the back of a squad car. Now you might think that this is where things get better, but as soon as my uncle was out of jail, he tried everything in his power to make us homeless again. He hired some people to break in and rob us. Rocks would be thrown at our windows, and we would be harassed in public. We tried reporting him, but we had no proof. My grandparents' house was very isolated, and not too many people were passing by, which made it an easy target. During a walk, my sister was almost assaulted by some men, but thankfully, she was able to get away. Once my father was financially stable again, he hired a private detective to monitor our house. They captured a photo of my uncle breaking into our house. My guess is that he ran out of money to hire people to do it for him. We reported this to the police and showed them the photos. He was charged with breaking and entering, among many other things, and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. My cousins and my aunt tried to contact us and would leave messages on our answering machine, calling us the worst names possible and that we should have died in the freezing cold, and that someday we are going to pay for everything that we did. But eventually they stopped reaching out to us. Thank God for that. Since the events of this story, I have finished college and was able to start a successful business with some friends of mine, and I'm doing well for myself. I just hope that whenever my uncle gets out of prison, he doesn't try to start anything with my family again. One morning, when I was in elementary school, probably 3rd or 4th grade, I was awoken by my mom in a rush. She had overslept, and since she always woke me up in the mornings, this meant that I too had overslept. And now there was no way I would be ready in time to catch the bus. My school started at 8 a.m., and the bus pickup time was around 7 o'clock, but it was already 6:40 and I was still in my pajamas, and I hadn't even had breakfast yet. So my mom decided that today, she would just tell the bus driver to go ahead, and she would take me to school that day, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. So I'm sitting there in the dining room, eating breakfast, still in my pajamas, and it's now around 6:50. We hear the bus pull up, about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mom peeks her head out of the door into the foggy morning and waves the bus on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus does not pull away. A short time later, we hear a knock at the door. My mom opens it and finds a man in a bus driver's uniform. He explains that he's a substitute driver because the regular guy called in sick. He tells my mom he knows he's a few minutes early, explaining that he wanted an early start since he didn't know the route too well. My mom explains to him that she's going to take me to school herself since we had woke up late. The man gets visibly upset and says that he could wait for a few minutes since he's already running ahead of schedule. My mom insists and says that I won't be ready to go in a few minutes and tells him to go on ahead. I remember that the man seemed angry about this, but turned around, got back on the bus, and left. I returned to eating my breakfast, and I still don't have my school clothes on at this point. But at 7 a.m. sharp, another bus pulls up to my house. Mom thought it was weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside, looking absolutely terrified, but doesn't say anything about it and just tells me to finish up and start getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but Mom would end up explaining a few years later. When she went to the second bus, she found that it was being driven by the regular bus driver, and it was full of the other kids that are usually on my route. The other bus was empty, by the way. My mom asked the driver about the substitute and about him calling in sick. "I never called in sick. There's no substitute driver on my route," he said. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mom to go back inside and call the police to report this incident, which she did without me knowing. There was absolutely no one covering for my bus driver that day. Whoever it was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again, or even if someone else had been abducted by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, if my mother hadn't overslept that day, I would have never made it to school or back home. This happened in the 90s. When I was growing up, my mom was a horrible addict. She barely took care of me as a kid. At the time of this incident, I was around 6 or 7 years old, so my awareness and understanding of things may not totally make sense. One night, my mother and I were on a car ride. I wasn't sure where we were going, but it was late at night. Looking back now, I assume it was very late because there weren't many other cars on the road, and I was resting in the back seat. I don't even remember getting into the car. My mom drove up to some sketchy house and left me in the back seat for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open, and someone violently grabbed me by my arm and yanked me out of the car. I began screaming and crying until the man looked me in my eyes and said, "Be quiet, don't try to run, or I'll kill you." He had a scruffy beard, and he looked absolutely insane. I was scared to death, so I listened. He held me tight by my arm, shut the car door, and walked with me down the street. I looked back at the house my mom was in, hoping that she would come out at the last second and save me. I stared at the house for as long as I could, as the man dragged me further and further away. As I walked down the street, I wanted to cry, but I was still in shock and too scared to do anything. I didn't even know what I was supposed to do, so I sniffled and cried as the man tightened his grip and yelled at me. I can't even describe just how frightened and confused I was. We walked for a little while longer, and ended up in the projects. It was a bunch of buildings crammed together in a very shitty neighborhood. We walked into one of the buildings and up a flight of stairs. My legs and feet were hurting like hell at this point, but I was still too scared to stop moving or complain. We climbed up another flight of stairs when I saw some random guy smoking a cigarette in the hallway. Then, without warning, the guy that had kidnapped me fell to the ground. It happened so fast. The next thing I remember, the man that was smoking the cigarette was punching and kicking the kidnapper in his head and his face. He then knocked him out cold. The cigarette guy picked up the kidnapper by the back of his jacket and threw him down the stairs. A little kid witnessing this kind of violence, an unconscious man being thrown down the stairs. To this day, I still have a fear of falling down the stairs. Once he hit the bottom, blood was everywhere. I still have no idea how the cigarette guy knew I needed help, but I'm glad he did. Maybe he saw the tears in my eyes. Maybe he just picked up on something and had a bad vibe. But he acted quickly. The cigarette guy was now pacing back and forth, swearing at himself, gritting his teeth, and clenching his fists. I thought maybe he was angry with me, so I started to cry. He then looked at me and said, Okay, shut up and stop crying. I wasn't as scared of the cigarette guy, but I still didn't want to test him. He began to ask me questions. Why are you out here this late? Where are your parents? And why would you talk to strangers? I was in so much shock and confusion, I couldn't answer his questions correctly. He then asked if I knew my way home, and I told him I didn't. In so many words, I tried to tell him about what happened, and somehow with the information I gave him, he knew where my mom's car was. I think he knew the area well enough to figure out where I needed to go. He told me he would take me back if I promised over and over that I wouldn't tell the police that I saw him or anyone that looked like him. This guy had an attitude, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go back to my mom, so I agreed. I followed him down the stairs. The bearded man was still lying on the floor, not moving at all. For all I knew, he was dead. The cigarette guy stepped over him, and I followed. He walked outside and nervously looked around. I remember him telling me, "The cops don't like me very much." He walked me out of the complex. He was going so fast that I basically had to jog to keep up with him. I started crying again, and he asked me what was wrong. I told him that my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and begrudgingly picking me up and awkwardly carried me in his arms. We walked down the street for a while. I then remember him swearing and running behind a house as a cop car was driving down the road. He put me down and he told me to run to the police cruiser. I tried, but my legs could barely move and continued down the road before I could even remotely get close to it. The cigarette guy kept swearing under his breath as he picked me up again. He took me behind a lot of the houses and hid from every cop car that drove by. In retrospect, I assumed the police were looking for me. He carried me in both arms, running fast down the road. When I saw my mom at her car in the distance, she was surrounded by the police. The cigarette guy set me down and told me to run to where my mom was. Upon seeing her, I got so excited that the pain in my legs disappeared. I ran toward the police and my mother. She picked me up and hugged me tight. After I was reunited with her, the police began to ask me and my mother questions. I don't remember much about their questioning, but I do remember my mother telling them some convoluted story that didn't make any sense. She basically told me not to say anything, and being a kid, I didn't. I just sat there and cried. We went home after that. A few days later, my dad comes and picks me up. I told him everything, and after I did, I never stayed with my mom again. Looking back to that day as an adult, I never forgave my mom. Not long ago, I asked my dad what he remembers about the situation, and he told me what he thinks happened was that my mom was there to buy drugs, and I was kidnapped by somebody who just happened to be walking down the street. The person that saved me probably had warrants, and was not angry with me, but was just frustrated with the situation that he had to deal with. Imagine being a criminal on the run, and now you have to help a kidnapped girl after you just beat up her kidnapper and possibly killed him. If he would have gotten caught with me, he may have been charged for kidnapping. With my mom lying, and me being in shock and confused, I likely wouldn't have been able to tell the police that the cigarette guy was the one that helped me. Despite whatever crimes the cigarette guy committed in his past, he was the one that helped me that night. And for that, I'll be forever grateful.
My husband and I are both in our 60s and live together in a small house in Atlanta, Georgia. We weren't the type to go out anymore and just naturally enjoyed the peace and comfort of our own home. My husband owns a security camera business, and we made enough money from it to be able to retire without having the financial burden of money issues. My husband had gotten a call from one of his customers telling him that one of their cameras we installed wasn't working. I always enjoyed going with my husband anywhere he went, as him and I were both getting older and I wanted to cherish the time we had. We go to the address and fix their cameras, and on the way home we decided to grab food on the way. Now, we were driving in an unfamiliar area, so we didn't know what was around to eat that was good. Eventually, my husband points out that there was a small diner down the road that one of his friends had recommended. It had a nearly 5-star rating online, so we decided to give it a try. Right off the bat, it appeared slow, with the only people being us and a younger-looking woman sitting alone in one of the booths. She appeared to be in her mid-30s and seemed to be constantly alert about something. Looking out the windows, looking behind her, checking her phone, etc. We thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it as, let's face it, it's not our business or concern. A minute later, a waitress comes to seat us and hands us each a menu with some silverware. My husband proceeded to quietly tell our waitress if the woman in the other booth was okay. She then tells us that she came in over an hour ago crying, refusing to order any food, and has been acting like that ever since. Now, there's no real way to say this without sounding weird, but my husband is very nice. Like, he's polite, but always goes out of his way to make sure people are okay. Because of this, he gets up and approaches the woman who is now uncontrollably shaking. Right as he taps her shoulder, she abruptly screams, telling my husband to leave her the hell alone. I motion for him to come back, and he does just that, giving me a "what the hell is she on" kind of gesture. We order our food, and as we're leaving, we look at the woman one last time and see that she now has her head down sobbing. We drive back home, and we're in a constant worry about what she possibly could have been dealing with that would make her act like that. Drugs, a breakup, depression, we didn't know. Anyway, we moved on with our life after that until a few days later when we hear a knock on our front door. My husband went to open it, and standing on our stoop were 2 men in suits asking for our names. They were the FBI. "Were you both at the Soy Inn Diner on December 20th of this year?" they asked. Yes. "Do you know anything about this woman?" One of the men proceeded to show us a picture of the woman from the diner taken on the surveillance cameras. We told him that we had seen her at the diner acting all strange and not in her right mind. Turns out, the reason she was reacting the way we saw her was because of a pregnancy. She had murdered her newborn and disposed it into a wooded area right before coming into the diner. She told police that she was very religious and didn't want to get an abortion because of it. And with her not ready to have a baby, she did the only thing she could do, which was to get rid of it. Why she didn't put it up for adoption or why she had the baby in the first place is anyone's guess. All my husband and I know is that she is one sick, twisted individual. My parents both own a small family-owned diner in Nashville, Tennessee. They've been in the business for almost 20 years now, and while it's had its fair share of flaws from the pandemic, it's still in business till this day. This story is told in the perspective of my dad. This happened just a few years before I was born, and my dad sometimes uses this story as a way to teach us to never be too generous. At the time, my mother was undergoing a knee surgery, which made her unable to help my dad, meaning he had to do it all by himself. Having to run the place by himself for a good while was difficult, but he got the job done. One night, he had been working the front counter getting ready to close the diner like he always did. He had just closed the register when he hears the all-too-familiar door chime and sees a woman walk in. She appeared disheveled and clearly sober. He sighs, but being the generous guy my dad was, he offers to take her order. According to my dad, she seemed off in a way that he couldn't exactly understand. Walking funny, looking up at the ceiling, and overall just lost. However, when my dad wanted to take her order, she sort of snapped back into reality and gladly told him what she wanted. After placing her order, she handed him a crumpled up $5 bill and proceeded to hand it to my dad. Now, the original bill was over $10, but seeing as she was clearly out of it, he decided to help her by telling her it was free and that she could go. Like I said, my dad is very generous, so when he saw that someone was in need, he did what he could. The woman gave him a nod as a way of, I guess, saying thank you and left the diner down a sidewalk until she wasn't seen anymore. My dad thought of it as rewarding for doing a good deed, even though he technically lost a sale. Having grown up in the South, it wasn't uncommon to come across people like the woman, that I know for a fact. About maybe an hour or so goes by, and my dad is sitting on one of the booths drinking a coffee, just keeping to himself, and that's when he hears tapping coming from the front door. He turns around, and it's the same woman along with two other men he hadn't seen before. The three of them are looking into the diner trying to find my dad. Thankfully, the lights were off, as my dad for some reason always enjoyed spending his time in the dark, so they didn't see him. The only reason why my dad was able to see them was because of the light coming from the parking lot. All of a sudden, he sees one of the men smash open one of the windows with a crowbar and jump inside. By this point, my dad was hiding under the table, praying to God none of them find him. He hears one of the men tell the other to find the light switch and that if they end up finding him, they would kill him. Now, the light switch could only be turned on from inside of the kitchen, which was sort of hard to find unless you were actively looking or knew where it was. Minutes felt like hours as my dad hid underneath the table, trying not to make a sound, praying they wouldn't find him. Now, my dad is a soft teddy bear and never enjoyed the idea of fighting. Plus, he didn't know what they were even capable of. All of a sudden, he hears the sound of police sirens in the distance and watches as all three of them bolt out the door with the register. The police came a few seconds later and questioned my dad about what had happened. Unfortunately, however, it was too dark to give an accurate description of them except for the woman. It turns out that there had been a homeless person nearby who had seen them break in and called the police. My dad ended up giving him a week's worth of food in exchange. A month later, police had arrested 3 people in the area after attempting to break into a nearby gas station. Lo and behold, it was the same people who broke into the diner. I guess they had some sort of a Bonnie and Clyde type trio going on. It was later revealed that the 3 of them had been arrested for not only robbing the diner and gas station, but also a bank, pizzeria, and even a nail salon. What scares my family the most about this is that there was a very strong possibility that my father might have not made it home that night had he been found. When I was a teenager, I worked as a waitress at a local diner in my hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. Don't even get me started with the Ohio jokes. I was 19 years old at the time and had just started my first semester in college. I would commonly work at the diner during the weekends as I had classes during the week. It was this small 1950s style diner that was a popular hotspot in the area. Because the weekends were our busiest days, those were the days where they really needed me the most. One night, one of my coworkers had called out sick and my manager had asked me to cover. Being the broke-ass college student I was, I figured I could use the extra hours. Mind you, this was on a Wednesday night, meaning this was during the week. I had never worked a weekday shift, so I really didn't know what to expect. For the first few hours of the shift, it was like any other night. You'd have a group of people come in, some individuals, and even that one person coming in for a simple coffee. Now let's fast forward till around 11 p.m. We were set to close in an hour, and my manager had instructed me to start wiping down the tables and putting the chairs away. I was in the middle of putting the chairs up on the table when I see a man walk in by himself. He appeared to be in his mid-40s with a long gray beard and wore a hat that really stood out to me. On his hat read the word Hoyt in big bold letters. I'm not sure why that stuck out with me the most, but for whatever reason, it did. He approaches the front counter and starts mumbling to himself while shaking his arms. One thing I did notice was that he kept on repeating the name Ashley in a very direct tone. In fact, that was pretty much the only thing he said. I have no idea who Ashley was or why he was saying that, but I could only assume he had some sort of disability, so I immediately felt sympathy for him. My manager motions for me to take his order, and I walk over and ask him what he'd like. His eyes seemed so lost and kinda stared at me in a way I didn't feel comfortable with. He stares at me for a few seconds before pointing up to the menu screen above me, though I wasn't sure what item he was pointing to, even after trying to guide him. Now, he obviously couldn't speak, so my manager and I tried to help him decide, to which he then gave up and left the diner without saying a word. I couldn't help but feel bad for him, but at the end of the day, there was nothing I could do. 12 o'clock came sooner than expected, and I clocked out just wanting to go home and get to sleep. I thankfully made it home safe with no problems and practically threw myself onto my bed. Now this is the part where things get absolutely insane. I was asleep for a good 2 hours or so before I awoke to a phone call from an unknown number. I take a look at the time, which read 3 a.m. Why would someone be calling me this late at night? I thought. I could only assume it was bad news and answered the phone with a groggy voice. Almost instantly, I hear the all too familiar voice at the end of the line repeating the name Ashley. I remember letting out a huge gasp before hanging up and feeling like my whole world was falling apart. Trust me when I say I didn't get a minute of sleep that night as my constant paranoia crept through me. I have no idea how he managed to find my phone number and call me. Hell, he didn't even know my name as I wasn't wearing my name tag. The sight of the sunrise practically lifted the weight off of me, where I finally made the decision to quit my job. I called my manager that morning and told her I quit. No more late night shifts at the diner for me. Now, I would have just contacted the police, but what were they gonna do? Besides, the call I got was labeled as no caller ID. Also, I don't mean to sound rude by saying this, but the police in my area aren't really the best when it comes to solving stalker issues. I know this because I've dealt with it before, but nowhere as near as close to this. I never ended up telling my parents about it, as they'd only add more pressure to the situation. Nothing has happened since then, and I really hope it stays that way. I now work at a grocery store and hopefully never have to see anyone wearing a hat that says Hoyt.
When I was 18 and freshly broken up with my way older boyfriend, I basically went crazy with dating guys. At the time, I also dressed very goth, even going as far as to wear a real corset and trench coat, mostly just enjoying the attention. One particular afternoon, my friend and roommate at the time decided to eat at a local Japanese restaurant with both of us all dressed up. Our waiter was a mediocre skinny white guy who clearly was a little alternative, but it was hard to tell really with the uniform. We had joked about me leaving my phone number on the receipt or something, so I hyped myself up, and I did so. Later that night, he had sent me a text. We had talked for a few days, never really having a right time to meet up, as I worked 40 minutes away from where I lived. He mentioned that the boots he wore meant a lot to him, and some other odd things that just seemed like edgy jokes. One really late night coming home, I was texting and driving, as any 18-year-old does, and we decided to meet up. My stupid self invited him over to my apartment where it was just me and the roommate who had been with me before. Our other two roommates were not home yet. At first, it was fine because I was already drunk, so I would just let him rant about whatever he wanted. He kind of just went on and on about his life, going to jail, medical bills, his parents, and more. Eventually, he asked me if I wanted to see his tattoos, and I was just like, sure, why not? He lifted up his shirt, and not only could I see the handgun tucked in his waistband, but also that he had multiple badly covered up Nazi tattoos. One was just slightly covered with a banana. I don't know what it was, but I had simply decided the best way to deal with this situation was to appease him, so I just went along with it casually. I don't remember exactly every detail because it was over 2 years ago and I was drunk. But he ended up pulling his gun out and putting it to my head, asking me if I was scared. I was immensely confused and I tried to call his bluff, saying I wasn't, which got him to put it away for a while. When we went to hook up in my messy ass room, he had pulled his gun on me yet again, saying he wanted to do it with it out. I got mad and I had tried to fight him off me and get it away from my head. Of course, I wasn't as strong as him, and he had hit me in the arm with it, which that shit really hurt because it was a nice one. When I finally got him off of me and he realized I was pissed, not scared, he had started acting like a crackhead, saying I was crazy for not caring about him pulling a gun on me. He ran off, jumped the fence of the apartment complex, and not even taking his car that he had come in. In the morning, his car was gone, and I had a large bruise from where he had hit me. While to me it's a funny story, I do now realize how bad it could have ended up. So, to the crazy-ass waiter from the Japanese restaurant, I don't think I want to see you again.
Years ago, for a short time, I worked at a movie theater near where I lived. I was a teenager, about 17 or 18 years old, and lived with my parents. One night, I was working late. I worked in the concessions at the theater and would sell popcorn and candy and stuff to moviegoers. On this night in particular, when it got sort of late, things quieted down and some of my coworkers left. It was then just me and my coworker Adam, who was a couple of years older than me and was working at the front selling the tickets. On most nights, about 15 minutes after the last movie of the night started, Adam or whoever was working at the front would lock the doors. Then I would stay at concessions until the movie was almost over. We would clean, and after the movie ended and everyone would leave, we would finish our cleaning and go home. So on this night in particular, I remember that the final movie of the night had started. When that happened, the lobby pretty much cleared out and I was by myself. A short time later, about 15 or 20 minutes into the movie, I looked to the front, which was a little ways away in the lobby, but I could still see. Adam was not by the doors where he sold tickets, so I assumed that he had locked the doors already and had moved on. He was most likely cleaning an auditorium that was empty. I had to stay at the concessions for a while longer though. As I stayed there, a couple of minutes later, and I remember seeing the front doors to the theater open. A man walked in who immediately looked sketchy. He was wearing a brown jacket and winter hat, and the guy looked down at the floor as he entered. He was walking rather fast, and I realized that Adam must not have locked the doors. I was sort of annoyed about that, but there was nothing that I could do. The man walked right past the ticket counter and then started in my direction. However, he turned and blew past me as well, not even looking at me. It was like he was on a mission to get someplace. He was headed to the hallway with the movies in them. There was only one movie still showing, and I wasn't sure if this guy was going to try to get in and watch it for free or something. I stayed where I was for the next bit of time, and nobody came to get any snacks. So when the movie was almost over, I turned the lights off to my concessions counter and then finished cleaning it. After that, I went over to find Adam. He was in fact in one of the auditoriums cleaning. I told him how the guy had entered, and Adam realized that he had forgot to lock the door. He then went back and locked it finally, and luckily nobody else had gone in. When I went to the main hallway, I didn't see the guy, so I assumed that he had gotten into the movie that was playing for free. Adam and I went back to work after that until the movie was over a short time later. When that happened, everyone left the theater and made their way out. Within 10 to 15 minutes, everybody was gone, and Adam and I were the only ones there. Or so we thought. We went into the auditorium that the movie had been in and cleaned it. When we left, we noticed something. At the far other end of the hallway, a long ways away, the same man who I had seen enter the theater was standing there. He was facing us and just staring right in our direction. It just looked really strange because he wasn't doing anything. We started to walk a little closer to the guy, and I felt nervous about the whole situation. We had never had anybody really hang around that long after close before. I called out to the man saying that the theater was closed now and he would have to leave. He did not respond though, he just kept standing there. Adam and I moved away into the lobby, and I told him how that was the guy who had walked in when we were supposed to be closed. I walked back into the hallway to see that the man was still standing there in the same place. Then he started waving at me. It was not a friendly wave though. The man did not really have any expression on his face. It really creeped me out, and I didn't know what to do. I went back into the lobby and told Adam that we needed to get this guy to leave. We decided to go back into the hallway once again, where once again the man was still standing there in the same place. He waved at me again as well. The man then started walking towards us. We were both really creeped out and didn't know what he would do, but it seemed like maybe he would leave because he was walking in the direction of the lobby. So we went back into the lobby, but the man never entered it. After a few minutes, I went back into the hallway. The man was finally gone. I didn't see him. Adam and I then carefully searched the entire theater up and down. The man was not found. He must have left out another exit. We were just glad that he was gone. We then finished up and left for the night. I didn't work there too much longer, and that remains the scariest thing that ever happened while I worked there.
My name is Josh, and I'm currently 20 as I'm writing this. This happened almost 4 months ago when I moved out of state to start my first semester of college. My financial aid would not cover housing, so I found myself scrambling to find off-campus housing. Fortunately, with the help of my parents, I was able to rent out a house for 2 semesters. It was this small one-storied home that was just a hop, skip, and a jump from campus. It wasn't the nicest house, but it was what I could afford at the time. The majority of people in the surrounding homes were a lot older than me, though that was expected when living off campus. However, there was this one guy who lived a couple houses down that gave off a really weird vibe. If I had to guess, I'd say he had to be in his late 50s or early 60s. He would go on long walks with his dog really early in the morning and knock on my door to say good morning. At first, it wasn't that strange, but he began doing this every day, which made me a bit irritated. On top of this, he would always try to strike up these long, unnecessary conversations that I wasn't interested in. If I ever made up an excuse as to why I couldn't talk to him, he'd disregard my words and do it anyway. It even came to a point where I told him I was late for class, and he had walked with me to campus. The only time he'd ever leave is if I went into class or in one of the buildings. No matter how many times I tried getting him to go away, he still persisted. I'd give him a dry response, he'd only talk more. I'd walk faster, he'd walk faster. This went on for a good 2 weeks before I finally told him in the most polite way to leave me alone in the mornings as I had school. He seemed to have understood, but also gave me this look of pure disappointment. I felt bad, but I legitimately couldn't have him doing what he's been doing anymore. I remember one of the other neighbors telling me he apparently suffered from some personality disorder, but that he didn't have a history of violence or anything. I asked why he seemed to only be acting like this towards me, and he told me that it wasn't his place to decide who lived there, as that decision was up to the property manager. Weeks went by, and I hadn't seen him at my door, nor did I see him come out of his house with his dog. I thought of this as suspicious, but dismissed it as him respecting my wishes by leaving me alone. Those weeks were normal, with me focusing on my studies, being social with friends, etc. Life went on as usual after that, until one night where something happened I didn't expect. I was in my room studying for one of my midterms when I hear something small hit my window. The curtains were covered, so I wasn't able to see what it was. About 10 seconds later, I hear it again and then came to the conclusion that it was a small rock hitting my window. This time, I got up and opened my curtains to see the man standing still as a statue outside. As if that wasn't strange enough by itself, he wasn't even on the sidewalk, but rather on the driveway of the house. By this point, it was decently late and decided to call it a night. I simply ignored him by closing my curtains, even though I was terrified inside. I shut off all the lights, making sure to lock every door and window in the house to ensure he didn't come in. The next morning, I carefully unlocked the front door to check if he was still out there. When the coast was clear, I booked it toward campus where I was constantly looking back to make sure I wasn't being followed. I went to my classes, hung out with some of my friends, and by the time evening hit, I walked back home and was met with a sight I wasn't expecting. There were about 3, maybe 4 police cars along with an ambulance parked outside my house, their lights flashing over the sound of radio chatter. I saw paramedics putting a man I had never seen before on a stretcher and into the ambulance. I then saw police handcuffing my creepy neighbor and putting him into a police cruiser. When I basically demanded to know what was going on, they told me that the person harmed was actually the meter reader. I completely forgot about this, as I've only ever met the meter reader once, and that was when I moved in. By law, a meter reader can typically enter a home whether you're there to let them in or not. He had keys to my house and entered through the back door to check the meters in the basement. Waiting for him in the basement was my neighbor, who jumped him with one of my kitchen knives and jammed it into his shoulder. The reason he was in my house was to probably wait for me until I got home. He must have mistaken the meter reader for me, and that's when he attacked. To my surprise, someone in the area had spotted the man entering the house through a window before the reader got there and called the police. A couple days later, I was moved to a different location off campus and was actually reimbursed for what my family paid. I'm graduating in a couple years, and while I'm definitely going to miss college, I sure hope I don't ever encounter something like that again. About 2 years ago, I bought a house for the first time ever at only 28 years old. It was my first ever real investment, you can say, and I couldn't be prouder of myself. I worked in the entertainment industry for big celebrities / social media influencers and stuff like that, so I made decent money. Most of my neighbors were nice. Some had kids, some didn't, and sort of just kept to themselves. It was just me and my dog Milo. Milo was a pure white Dogo Argentino with the height of a small horse and a bite so powerful it could tear a limb off. All I have to say is, good luck breaking into my house with him around. My first week of moving in, I met one of my neighbors who gave me the all too familiar greeting followed by a batch of sugar cookies. The usual welcoming you'd commonly see when someone moves into a new neighborhood. She introduced herself as Brenda and told me she had lived just up the street and that it was nice to meet me. She was the sweet little old lady who had the heart of gold and was a joy to anyone. Brenda had went on to explain that her cookies were homemade and that it was her very own recipe. Surprisingly enough, I was actually allergic to wheat flour, but I wasn't going to be rude and decline them. I just put them on the kitchen counter, wondering if I should throw them away or give them to someone in need. By this point, I had successfully moved everything in and decided to call some of my childhood friends over to come and celebrate with some beer. It was already 9 and I had to get to bed early for work the next morning, so I knew my friends couldn't stay long. When they arrived, we had seen a football game on TV, had some dinner, and just enjoyed ourselves. At one point, we're all talking amongst ourselves, having a blast with beers in our hands, when I see Milo staring at me in this weird position. I playfully asked him what was up, and he responded with faint whimpers as he laid back down. It was then when I immediately knew something was wrong. I had Milo for almost 5 years now, and not once did I ever see him behave like this. Now, I'm obviously no expert or anything, but it was almost as if his attitude kept changing every few minutes. One minute he'd be happy, the next he'd be sad, and the next minute just flat out angry. His demeanor completely altered. One of my friends had a girlfriend who was a vet, and he was able to FaceTime her where I was able to tell her what was going on. She immediately started asking if I fed him something he shouldn't have eaten or if he were on medication. I was about to say no when I remembered about the cookies I had left on the table. Sure enough, I found a chewed up plastic plate along with half a dozen of those cookies devoured scattered across the hallway. Milo must have helped himself to my special treat when I wasn't looking, and I guess I didn't notice until now. 2 of my friends had to leave while the other one had decided to help me rush Milo to the vet. Turns out, he was just on the verge of death when we got there. As the vet explained, he was displaying unusual symptoms. They ran a few tests on him, and what they found shocked them to their core. High traces of brodifacoum were found in Milo's system. It's a seriously dangerous poison used for killing larger rodents like possums and other pests. When ingested or consumed by humans, it causes your body to shut down your organs to the point where your body doesn't even know how to fight it off. It starts off mild, but gradually develops over a few hours. We later found out that it had been embedded inside of the cookies. Law enforcement had taken down my information about the woman who gave me those cookies, and after a whole search of the neighborhood, she was never found. To be completely honest with you, I wasn't even sure if she even lived in the neighborhood. Why she targeted me and why she laced the cookies with rodent poison is still unclear. Milo thankfully ended up living and is still the happiest companion I know. My wife and I got married and just had our first kid who absolutely adores Milo. I'll protect them all with my life.
I lived in that apartment for just under a year. It was a ground floor, 1 bedroom on the east side of the complex, a really old building with cheap carpet. That kind of place where your neighbors are close enough to hear you sneeze through that drywall. Still, I guess it was peaceful enough. Most of the tenants were middle-aged or older, quiet folks with too much debt and not enough ambition. You'd hear the occasional shouting match through the vents or catch a late-night party teetering towards chaos, but it was rare. The cops would come maybe twice that whole first 6 months, and neither time did it seem like anything major. For me, I just kept to myself, worked really long hours, came home, ate dinner, watched some TV, and then went to bed. I didn't need noise. I'd had my time in louder and messier places. At this point in my life, this apartment was supposed to be my safe haven, my first real grown-up place, and for a while that's exactly what it was. And things didn't start to get weird until Flynn moved in. He showed up on a Wednesday morning, and I remember it because his moving van was blocking my car in. I had to bang on the cab just to get out to work. He didn't apologize, just gave me this blank stare like he hadn't heard a word that I just said to him. Thin guy, probably in his 40s, but somehow ageless in this way that made it hard to pin him down. Black hoodie, gloves in June, old army boots with the laces triple knotted. Not the kind of look you expect from somebody moving into a low-income housing. I couldn't tell if he was crazy or just eccentric. I introduced myself, got his first name, and that was as much as he was willing to share, at least in the moment. He moved in fast, and within 2 hours the van was gone and Flynn was holed up behind his door and just disappeared. That first week was really quiet, but something about the air near his place started to feel charged, like standing far too close to a buzzing transformer. At night, I'd hear the faint click of metal or the low scratch of something being dragged across concrete out on his patio. Nothing dramatic or Nothing you'd call the cops over, but I just noticed it, and it was always after midnight. By week 2, I knew the guy was a complete weirdo. The first time I saw the fire, I thought maybe he was just grilling. I stepped out onto my patio and smelled the burning paper almost immediately. Not charcoal, not meat, just scorched papers and something that smelled like melted plastic. I peered around the divider and there he was. Flynn crouched over this big metal coffee can, feeding papers into the flame like he was praying to it. The way he stared into it, it wasn't normal. It wasn't boredom, but almost devotion. I grew up Baptist. I've seen that same kind of look on people's faces during prayer and sermon. This guy moved in next door to me and he was out of his damn mind. I stood there watching until he glanced my way, not moving, just locking eyes. He didn't say a word, just reached out slowly and placed a lid over the fire, snuffing it out instantly. Then he went back inside. I didn't really sleep that much that night. Just the whole thing kind of put me off. A few nights after that fire, I noticed a new wrinkle in the routine. Flynn had started dragging something across his floor around 2 a.m. This slow and heavy scraping sound, like furniture being moved an inch at a time. I knew it wasn't just my imagination because the baseboard heater on our shared wall would buzz whenever he did it. It only lasted a few minutes, but it was always that same exact sound, like a piece of metal being hauled across tile. I started jotting it all down in a notebook, not because I thought anything criminal was going on, but because I had a feeling that it might get there. Next came the SUV. It was one of those matte black Suburbans you only see in movies or government stings. No plates, tinted windows dark enough to double as mirrors. The first time it showed up, I thought maybe Flynn was dealing drugs or maybe some high-level courier gig or something worse, I don't know. But the men who stepped out didn't look like drug runners, no gold chains or neck tattoos. These guys wore crisp, matching suits, moved like military. Clean-shaven, stoic faces, no wasted movement. They went straight to Flynn's door and knocked once, then walked in without even waiting. The door just opened. I didn't hear any yelling, no loud conversations, not even laughter. Just the creak of the furniture and some soft footsteps. I think they stayed maybe 2 hours, then left in that same coordinated fashion, almost like a drill team. The visit happened 3 times in the span of 2 weeks. I attempted to ask Flynn about it. We crossed paths near the mailboxes one morning and I gave him this friendly nod. Asked if he was settling in okay. He didn't look up, just muttered something that sounded almost like fine and kept walking. I followed him a few steps, not aggressively, just to keep the conversation going. I asked him if that black SUV was family or maybe a security firm or something. That's when he stopped, turned, and looked right through me. You know, I'd just mind your own business if I were you, he said. His voice was flat, but there was weight behind it, like a warning that he'd given before. Not angry, not defensive, just a matter-of-fact threat. The kind of man makes when he's not bluffing. I backed up because what more could I do? This guy was clearly mental and also had some kind of security hookup that I did not want to mess with. Still, I couldn't help myself. I bought a cheap dash cam and parked facing the walkway, angled it just enough to catch whoever came or went. I started recording all the late night visits, but after the 3rd black SUV sighting, nothing had happened for weeks. No more fires, no more visitors. Flynn didn't leave his apartment during the day, at least from what I could tell. I started to wonder if he'd even moved out or maybe he was dead up there. Then a couple showed up. It was a Friday night. I had just sat down to eat when I heard the purr of a low-slung engine outside. Not a junker or a pickup, this was luxury. I peeked through the blinds and saw a silver McLaren pulled into the visitor spot. 2 people got out, a man and a woman, both in these tailored coats and dressed like they were heading to the red carpet. The woman wore heels so sharp they clicked like gunshots. The man had this navy blazer, clean jawline, hair trimmed to the millimeter. They walked straight to Flynn's unit. He opened up the door before they knocked, and I promise you, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The following wasn't quiet like the other visits. I couldn't make out every word, but the tone was clipped and strained, urgent, bordering on angry. There was pacing, raised voices, Flynn's deeper tone trying to stay calm while the younger guy seemed to push back harder. The woman said very little, but when she did speak, it cut through like a knife. Then abruptly it all stopped. All three of them walked out calmly, almost robotically, and Flynn escorted them to their car. He even smiled as they drove off. And that was that. Over those next few days, the silence felt deliberate. Not a creak, not a scrape. Flynn's blinds were always shut tight. The lights were never on, so no smells even coming from his vent. This deep quiet had now settled in. Not long after all of this, a smell did come. It hit me the following Thursday. Just a sour tinge at first, like spoiled milk or wet garbage left out for far too long, but by Friday it was unbearable. I thought maybe something died in the crawl space, so I reported it to the management. They said somebody would come check it out, but nobody did. Saturday morning I left for work with the windows open, and my shirt collar pulled over my face. When I got back that evening, the parking lot was filled with patrol cars. 2 cruisers, an unmarked black unit, and an ambulance. Yellow tape across Flynn's door. A crime scene tech squatting by the patio with a clipboard. One of the black-suited men that I'd seen before was now standing off to the side, arms crossed, watching the cops work. He wasn't saying anything. I stood at the far edge of the lot until one of the officers noticed me. He walked over, a really tall guy, maybe his mid-40s, looked really tired, and I asked what was going on. "We found somebody deceased in the unit," he said. "You one of the neighbors?" "Yeah, he lived next door to me. I've been smelling something awful all week." "Well, that was probably him," the officer said flatly. "He's been dead at least that long, and we're still trying to confirm ID." That gave me an opening. I started telling him everything: the fires, the SUV visits, the couple in the sports car, the midnight dragging sound. The officer scribbled down some notes, nodding now and again, but never really looked surprised. "We're not treating this as a homicide, at least at this time," he said finally. "There was no signs of forced entry, no external injuries. Coroner thinks it was natural." I must have looked skeptical because he gave me this half shrug. "These things happen," he said. "Weird guy, weird life. Doesn't always mean some kind of foul play." I watched as they zipped up the body bag and loaded it into the ambulance. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off, staring at that thin wall between my unit and Flynn's. I thought about everything that I'd seen, everything that I'd heard, and just kept coming back to one detail that I hadn't shared. That last time I saw him, after the couple left, I caught a glimpse of something strange through a sliding door. Just a flash or a reflection maybe. But it looked like a metal table bolted to the floor with heavy leather straps hanging off the sides. It wasn't there before. What apartment would come with something like that? They cleared out Flynn's unit by the following Monday. No hazmat suits, no media coverage, just quiet men with gloves and cardboard boxes. Management didn't send out a notice or even acknowledge the death. I only knew he was officially gone when a cleaning crew came by and gutted the place, ripped up the carpet, pulled the blinds, emptied the fridge. I watched from behind my own curtains that entire time. Nobody took that metal table though, or at least I never saw it come out. It stayed there, square in the center of the room, covered with a tarp. When the crew left for lunch, I slipped out and peeked through the patio door. The straps that I'd seen weren't leather, they were thick canvas, army surplus style, stained with something dark around the buckles. There was a groove in the floor beneath it, almost like scoring from repeated dragging, the kind that you don't get from just one piece of furniture. Flynn had indeed died in that apartment, that much I knew, but nothing about it felt natural at all to me. I'd say a week later, I saw the black SUV again. No police on site this time, no lights, no noise. It pulled up around 5 in the morning and stayed parked for nearly an hour. Nobody went in, nobody came out. Then it just drove off, slow and casual, like it had all the time in the world. I tried looking up Flynn on the internet, but I had no last name to go on. I checked the public records, scanned some arrest reports, even pulled some county death records. Nothing. It was like this guy never existed. The unit stayed empty for months, then eventually a young couple ended up moving in. They hung these fairy lights on the patio, brought a baby home from the hospital, watered plants. Nice people, friendly. But occasionally on warm nights, when they leave the patio door cracked open, I could swear that I hear the same dragging sound through the wall. And I ask myself, what that unsuspecting family might be living on top of. I've been meaning to send my story in for a while now. I think every time I sit down to write it, my hands just hover over the keyboard, and I start questioning if it's even worth telling. But then I remember how I felt that night, that gnawing sensation deep in my gut, the way my skin prickled with adrenaline. And I figured, yeah, this does belong here, so I hope you guys enjoy my story. I've been a fan of Booze and Booze for around a year now, always looking forward to those late night uploads where I could turn the lights off, throw on my headphones, and let the stories wrap around me like a blanket. I never thought I'd have one to share, but this isn't just my story. It's something that happened to me and a coworker back when I was fresh out of high school, working late night shift at a home improvement store, a big one. I'm sure you can guess the name. Between the two of us, I think she got the worst of it. Back then, I was taking my first semester of college classes, scraping together tuition money by working at a regional hardware chain. It wasn't anything glamorous, running a register, handling inventory, mopping up whatever messes customers would leave behind, but it was pretty easy work. I liked most of my coworkers and the pay was decent, and most nights were uneventful. Keyword there being most nights. This one in particular was a pretty slow evening. Everyone was watching the clocks and none of them were moving. We were around an hour from closing. The store had that eerie, half-empty atmosphere that only big retail spaces get after dark. The lights above my head buzzed, casting this sick glow over the aisles, and the air smelled like sawdust and metal. The customers left in the building were the usual stragglers, contractors grabbing last-minute supplies, couples arguing over paint samples, that sort of thing. I was finishing up her return at customer service when she walked up to me. Let's call her Hannah. She was one of the newer hires, maybe a year or two older than me, and usually pretty upbeat. But that night she looked kind of different, tight-lipped, stiff-shouldered. Her eyes darted around like she was expecting something to lunge at her out from the shadows. "Hey," she said, low enough that I could only hear her. "Can you, walk with me for a little bit?" I raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" She swallowed and glanced over her shoulder. "I think I'm being followed." That snapped me to attention. She told me about this man, a big guy, older with a greasy baseball cap and a stare that made her skin crawl. He'd approached her in plumbing, asking her for her help to find a part. Nothing weird at first, but then he just didn't leave. Every time she tried to step away, he found another excuse to keep her there, his questions getting more off topic and more personal. Finally, she made up a reason to leave, and when she checked over her shoulder, he was still there watching her. That was 45 minutes ago. He followed her around the store, and eventually she lost him in power tools, then bolted to the nearest coworker for some kind of assistance. She didn't know where he was at now. I didn't ask any more questions. Hannah was obviously freaked out, and if there was even a chance that some creep was lurking about, I wasn't about to let her wander the store alone. Honestly, this was more exciting than anything work-related anyway, so I prefer to run interference than actually close the store. "Come on," I said, grabbing a clipboard from the counter. Let's look busy." We made our way towards the back aisles, checking inventory, scanning shelves, counting items. Occasionally, my eyes kept flicking up, sweeping the store, but I didn't see anybody out of place. Just a couple of customers near checkout. Donnie in a neon vest was restocking lumber, and one of my other friends was just dicking around on the forklift in the bay. "Are you sure he's still even here?" I whispered. Hannah hesitated. I don't know. I just feel like he is. For some reason, I just didn't like that answer. We kept moving, aisle by aisle, her sticking close to my side. About 20 minutes later, she seemed to relax a little bit. We hadn't seen the guy at all, and she was starting to think that maybe he did indeed leave. This actually proved to be two birds with one stone because we got a lot of that light inventory work done. And then, that's when I saw him. I was standing near the aisle end cap, watching my buddy do these slow, lazy donuts in the forklift out in lumber, shaking my head at his stupidity. Then I turned back to check on Hannah, only to spot him. He was lurking at the mouth of an aisle, half shielded by the end cap display. It was a big man, mid-50s with a broad chest and slumped shoulders, dressed in these dark jeans and a windbreaker. His baseball cap was pulled really low, but I could see the way he was looking at her. I could also see that this guy was jacked beneath that jacket. Even with the extra layer, his arms were 3 times the size of mine. He stared at Hannah, fixed, unblinking. I could tell his whole body was tense, like he was just waiting for the right moment to do something. This is not good. I forced my face into something neutral and walked back to Hannah, who was maybe 30 feet away, scanning a shelf. I walked right by that weirdo, down the aisle, and put myself between her and the guy, watching from the end of the shelving. I kept my voice casual. "Hey, let's head back to customer service." She frowned at me. "What? Why?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Because he's here, end of the aisle, watching you." Her face paled and I nodded at her, encouraging her that this was pretty serious. "Just walk," I murmured. "Now." She turned stiffly and started moving towards the front of the store, as quick as she could without actually running. I turned back to the aisle, ready for anything. To my relief, he wasn't right on top of me like I was expecting him to be. The man just hadn't moved. I stared him down, gripping my clipboard, fighting the urge to let my hands shake. Then I smiled, the way you do when you're trying to let somebody know that you're not afraid of them. "You need any help finding anything, sir?" His stare didn't even waver. I took a slow step toward him. "We're closing soon, just so you know." His mouth then twitched, somewhere between a grimace and a sneer. I could tell he wanted to say something back to me, but then without a word, he turned and walked off, disappearing down the aisle. I stood there for a few seconds, forcing my breath to stay even, pulse pounding in my ears. I felt like a damn gunslinger. I was glad to have helped out a coworker. And then I went to go find Hannah. She was back at customer service, gripping the counter, body rigid. A small crowd of assistant managers had gathered around her. "Is he gone?" I hesitated. "I don't know. I hope so." "Jesus," she muttered, pressing her hands over her face. "That guy's been watching me all night." "Yeah, he's super creepy. He didn't even say a word to me." We waited until the store officially closed, watching the last customers leave, making sure that he wasn't among them. I didn't see him again. Maybe he had in fact left. Maybe I spooked him. Either way, I was just relieved when we locked those doors. But that relief did not last long. An hour later, the store was empty except for a few employees. Most of us were already clocked out, trickling off to our cars. I stepped outside, the night air sharp and cold, the parking lot stretching dark and quiet around me. I glanced over and saw this single car parked at the far edge of the lot. All the employees parked on a small side lot, so whoever was out there was not an employee. I knew before I even got close. I walked slowly, trying to not look too obvious, heading toward my own car, but veering just enough to get a good look. A beat-up old sedan idling low, and inside, the same man. His face was barely visible in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, but he was just sitting there, waiting. A deep instinctual alarm flared up in my brain, every nerve firing off at once. Lizard brain, fight or flight. I turned on my heel and made a beeline back to the store. The security office for the strip mall was a few doors down, tucked in between a shuttered electronics store and a laundromat. I knocked on the glass and peered between the blinds. A guy in uniform answered me, maybe late 40s, heavy set, with a bored expression on his face. Something wrong? I jerked my thumb over my shoulder. Yeah, there's a guy parked in the lot. He was inside our store earlier, acting super weird and following my coworker around. Now he's just sitting there. The security guy frowned at me. He's still there now? Yeah, far into the lot, dark sedan. He grunted. All right, stay put. I stood there as he climbed into his marked SUV and rolled out into the lot, cruising slow towards that sedan. He stopped behind it and threw his lights on. I watched from a distance as he stepped out and approached the driver's side. A tense few seconds then passed, and then the guy in the sedan just fired up his engine. He didn't speed off though. He didn't make this big scene. He just pulled out, circled the lot, and then exited onto the road, slowly. As he passed me, he looked directly at me, eyes locked onto mine, dark and bottomless. And I swear to God, I felt something press against my chest, something heavy, like he was willing me to die right there on the sidewalk, like he was memorizing me for later. Almost like he was telling me that he would see me again. I watched his taillights vanish off into the dark. My pulse was still hammering in my ears. I only realized that I'd been holding my breath when the security guy rolled back up beside me and leaned out his window. Yeah, that guy was definitely off, he said, shaking his head. Kept acting like he had some kind of business here, but wouldn't say what. Just kept asking when people left for the night. A chill then coiled up my spine. What'd you tell him? I told him to take a fucking hike, the guard said. And lucky for you, kid, he did. He eyed me for a second. You drive straight home, keep an eye out, and if you see him again, call somebody immediately. I just nodded, trying to swallow that lump in my throat. Good call bringing it to us, he added. That guy wasn't just loitering, he was definitely waiting. I didn't ask what he meant, but I heard he knew. I hurriedly went back to my car, glancing over my shoulder the whole way, half expecting that old sedan to be idling at the end of the lot again, but it was gone. The entire parking lot was now empty. I locked my doors the second I got inside and just sat there gripping the wheel, forcing myself to catch my breath. Then I pulled out, making sure to check every mirror and every side street. I also took the long way home that night, just in case. For the next few days, I was on edge. Every time I would walk to my car at night, after closing, I half expected to see that sedan parked somewhere in the lot again, headlights off, waiting. We started leaving work in pairs, sticking close to other coworkers. I even told my manager about the whole thing, and he had security do extra sweeps of the property every single night. Thankfully, that guy never came back. Poor Hannah was shaken for a while too. She completely switched up her schedule, so she wouldn't be working nights anymore, which I can't really blame her for. Some nights I wondered if that had been the plan all along, if he'd been waiting for her to leave alone, to see if she got in her car by herself. I never ended up telling her what the security guy said. I didn't want to make her any more scared than she already was. I've actually sent a story into Booze and Booze before. Maybe some of you remember it. It was about my coworker Benji and this weird night shift incident that we had together. It's been a while since I last submitted, but I figure, why not? I'll throw another one your way. And this one's even crazier. I used to work in a call center for a nationwide towing company, the kind of place that stayed open 24/7 to dispatch trucks at all hours of the day and night. The job itself was simple: take calls, input service requests, and then send them out to the right drivers. Since I worked overnights, it was usually dead quiet, which meant I had a lot of downtime. My coworker Benji and I would have the same shifts, and we got along pretty well enough to pass those hours. Our office itself was inside this shared business complex. Nothing special, just a bunch of suites crammed together, totally empty at night. The only thing around that had any life after midnight was the 7-Eleven across the street. That place was a godsend during these long shifts. We'd head over to grab some snacks on break, vape in the parking lot before heading back into the desk. With that being said, it also brought in a little riffraff. Those that remember my last story may recall the details. I went out to use the external bathrooms, and while walking back into the office, I got jumped by a homeless dude that was hanging around one of our dumpsters. Lots of homeless flocked to the 7-Eleven at night, like moths to a flame. That night was like really any other. Calls were pretty slow, office was quiet, and then I'd say around 2 a.m., Benji and I decided to take a break. We lock up and cross the lot and started off towards the gas station. As we were walking, a car whipped into the parking lot really fast, jerking to a stop in front of the store. We both noticed it, but didn't think too much of it. Maybe just some drunk guy making a late night beer run or something. Probably needs a box of condoms, Benji said, laughing. We were halfway across the street when we heard the shouting. At first it was muffled and distant, but then a man's voice cut through the night, barking orders loud and aggressively. The car that had screeched into the lot suddenly tore back off onto the road, disappearing down a side street, tires screaming. And then, through the huge glass windows of the 7-Eleven, we saw a man in a ski mask holding a gun. Benji grabbed my arm. Holy shit. I didn't say anything. I just turned and started walking back toward the office, fast. My pulse was slamming as I kept my eyes on the store. The guy inside was moving in every direction, pointing the gun at the cashier. Then, as if in slow motion, I saw him whip his head toward us, and we weren't alone. Another guy, a second one, also in a mask, came running out of the store. He looked around and then locked eyes with us, and then sprinted straight for us. Benji and I didn't say a word, we just ran. This really felt like something straight out of Grand Theft Auto. We didn't need any logic or instruction. This was real danger. Only one move to be made, and that was just to get the fuck out. We turned around and the two guys outside the 7-Eleven locked on, their footfalls coming up behind us. One of them, the one with the gun, yelled something that I couldn't quite make out, but I don't think I really needed to hear it to understand. This was a chase. Benji was a step ahead of me, already in a full sprint across the parking lot, so I pushed my legs harder, pumping my arms and tried to keep up. Our office was close, just a couple of 100 feet away, but that distance had never felt so damn long until then. Behind us, I heard the first guy's shoe slap against the pavement. He was fast, a lot faster than me. The gunman was trailing behind him, and the other guy, the one who'd been barking orders inside, was gaining ground. I half expected to feel him grab my collar at any second. I risked taking a glance back, and it was a big mistake. The bastard was literally right there, 5 feet away, his ski mask riding up just enough for me to see his mouth twisted up into a snarl. "You're mine," he shouted. Benji reached for the door first, skidding to a stop, hands fumbling for the keypad. Come on, come on. I could hear the beeping as he punched in the code. My feet hit the landing of the building and we were almost there. But then something slammed into my back and I went down hard, my chin bouncing off the concrete. My teeth clacked together, pain exploding through my jaw. The weight of the guy was on me in an instant, his hands clawing at my jacket, trying to turn me over. Fuck! I gasped out, twisting and kicking out blindly. My shoe connected with something soft, a stomach, maybe his groin, and the guy let out this grunt, loosening his grip just enough for me to roll free. Benji was screaming my name the whole time. Get the fuck up, dude, get up! I scrambled to my feet, blood in my mouth, world tilting. The guy then lunged again, grabbing at my sleeve, but I ripped free, hurled myself towards the door. Benji had it open just enough for me to squeeze through, and the second I was inside, he threw his weight against it, trying to slam it shut. But the guy outside was not giving up easily. It was the other guy, the one with the gun, giving it everything he had trying to get inside. A hand then shot through the gap. Thick fingers clawed at the air trying to grab at us. Benji grunted and shoved harder. Dude, help me! I threw myself against the door. The guy outside let out this furious roar, pushing back, fingers scraping against my arm the whole time. For a split second, I really thought he was about to win. I thought he was gonna get it open. If that happened, we'd be fucked for sure. But then from outside, I heard, "Move!" A gunshot exploded through the night. That sound was deafening in the enclosed space. I felt the impact of it on my chest like a punch from the inside. The guy outside cursed, jerking back, and we took the chance. Benji slammed the door shut and locked it into place. Silence. I staggered backward. My hands were shaking, adrenaline pouring through me like ice water. Neither of us were hit, thankfully, so we assumed they tried to shoot the door or the building, maybe even just up in the air to scare us. Benji was panting, staring at the door. Dude. Another bang. The guy outside punched the glass full force. Another bang. Again, bang. I could see his silhouette through the narrow windows. His breath was fogging up the glass. His posture was rigid with rage. His friend was standing right beside him, the gunman, and the two of them started circling the building, checking the windows and the other doors. We gotta go to the back office now, Benji said, grabbing my sleeve. Go, go. We ran deeper into the office, past empty desks and silent cubicles. The security office was in the back, just big enough for a desk and a few filing cabinets, and one single chair. But the door was solid wood, with a steel sheet inside of it, and it had a deadbolt. We threw ourselves inside and slammed it shut, locking it immediately. Outside, that banging continued. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and punched in 911. Operator immediately answering.
911, what's your emergency?
There's two guys trying to break into our office, I said. One of them has a gun. Benji sat against the wall, gripping his knees, and his chest was heaving. Are you in a safe location? The dispatcher asked. It was kind of funny to hear that question. As a roadside assistant operator, that was literally the opening line of our script. I think so, I said. We're locked inside a back office. From outside, we heard another boom, and that sound made me jump. What the fuck? Benji hissed. I could tell he was getting agitated. I didn't have to wander for very long. I could hear weird faded beeps from outside. The keypad. They shot the damn keypad. They're trying to get in, I whispered. Benji wiped his face, sweat slick on his forehead. Shit, man, shit. This is crazy. We're like fish in a barrel. We should have never ran back in here. The dispatcher was still talking to me, but I barely heard any words she said. I was far too busy listening to the sounds of outside, the muffled voices, the hurried footsteps, the gunman cursing underneath his breath. I heard another shot, then nothing. The silence stretched on, and I could hardly take a breath. That's when I heard sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the walls in frantic colors. Benji let out this breathless laugh, half hysteria, half relief. Oh shit, man. Holy shit. We stayed locked in that room until the cops banged on the door and announced themselves. That's when we finally stepped out, and I got my first real look at the damage. The front door was a complete mess. Bullet holes in the keypads, cracked spider webbing across the glass. The cops questioned us and we gave our statements, still shaking, still reeling. The two guys were long gone, disappeared off into the neighborhood, but we knew one thing for sure. They wanted us dead. And if we would have been a second slower, we would have been. The second we stepped out, it really hit me how close we'd actually been to dying. That front door was ruined. The keypad was a mangled mess of metal and shattered plastic. Bullet holes pocked the frame. A thin wisp of dust still curled from where the gunman had tried and failed to blast his way inside. A couple of the officers were already sweeping the area, flashlights cutting off through the dark. Another was waiting for us, notepad in hand. "Fellas okay?" he asked. Benji just barked out a laugh, the full weight of the situation finally washing over him. "Yeah, just fucking fantastic." I barely recognized my own voice when I spoke. Were they caught? The cop shook his head. They took off on foot before we arrived. We got units combing the area though, but no sign of them yet. Benji just ran a hand through his hair. Jesus Christ. The next 30 minutes were just a blur of questions and police chatter. We told him everything about the robbery, about the chase, about the fight at the door. An officer took photos of my arm where the guy had clawed at me. Another pointed out a smear of blood on the doorframe, the pavement where I fell. Damn, they wanted in bad, one of the cops muttered, eyeing those bullet holes. Yeah, no shit. Our boss, the owner-operator of the call center, showed up just after 3 a.m. He was an older guy, tough but fair. He looked at the damage with that kind of weary sigh that said he was already adding up the cost inside of his head. Jesus, boys, he said, rubbing a hand over his face. You okay? Benji was just staring at the shot-up door, jaw tight. I nodded at him. Yeah. Our boss exhaled. Well, you're done for the night. Go home and get some sleep. You're both on paid leave until this mess is sorted out. We didn't argue. We were far too wrung out, too drained. Benji drove me home and we barely spoke on the way there. But when I shut my apartment door behind me and locked it, that's when I finally let myself breathe a little and realized that my hands were still shaking. Those guys had been out for blood. And if we'd been just a second slower, we would have given it to them.